America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before we get started this morning, I just want to make one quick announcement. It was in the paper yesterday, and the word was out the other day that a friend of ours here on the beach, Roger Welton, died. Roger was a very active member of the beach Kiwanis here for years and years. And as you know, the Kiwanis do a lot of good here on the beach. They raise funds and they give scholarships to our children here on the beach to go to college and so forth. So I just want to extend our, on behalf of the town council and all the people of the town here, our deepest and heartfelt sympathies to the Welton family, survived by a daughter and a son and various other relatives. And we want to say thank you for sharing Roger with us all these years. Okay. First item on the agenda is a presentation on the Stormwater project. And, with us this morning from Tetra Tech are Danny Nelson and Tim Vanderwalker. Gentlemen?
And Christy Corey.
Good morning, Christy Corey for the record.
Sorry about that.
Okay. In previous council meeting, Councilmember Adderholt had asked that we give a presentation on the stormwater system, a little bit of background, and to show the benefits of it, so hopefully the residents would understand. We are here from Tetra Tech, and then Kay is here with Stella Molnar, and she's our PIO. So I'll let Timothy continue on with the presentation, and hopefully we can get a better understanding of it.
Christy, if I may, thank you for arranging this. Very helpful. Are they going to set the table as to how this all came about in the first place, or do you want to take that opportunity?
They're gonna handle all of that.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us today. As mentioned, I'm Tim Vanderwalker. I'm with Tetra Tech. I've been involved with the project for 4 or 5 years at this point. I'm an engineer with Tetra Tech, mainly roads and drainage. So at the request of staff, since we've been involved in this project for such a long time as the engineer, requested that we provide this presentation. It goes back through, just gives a brief history of the stormwater historically on the island, as well as what we've recently and what First, we wanted to introduce the team that's been involved throughout the whole process. Downside, Christy Corey is the utilities director and the lead point of contact running the program. Warren Rood is also with the town. He's the boots on the ground out in the field, working with the town, the water main side, but also on Arrow, but also on the side streets. Private sector partners include Tetra Tech, us as the engineer. Mitchell and Stark has been the contractor throughout the process. Molnar and Associates, Kay here. Molnar is today. They've been on the public information side, working with the residents, fielding calls, handling any issues that arise throughout the process. Going back to the very beginning, when we first started this process, the existing storm drain system that was on the island was non-existent or potentially non-functional in many areas. Development in the town started back in the 1950s, mid-century era. Development progressed. Low spots were identified, outfalls were platted, usually a single drain, potentially some swale systems tying to that drain, but in other areas, just relying on superficial flow to the canals or to an outfall or whatever it might be. There was little to no water quality treatment. Treatment was there is through swales. You can really only get treatment when you have about a foot of difference between the bottom of the swale and the groundwater table. A lot of points, that swale is so deep that you're not even getting that treatment volume. It's made means of conveyance. There's also was no tidal backflow, which meant that you have saltwater intrusion into your system, which is not good, as well as any low-lying areas are susceptible to tidal waters entering the right-of-way or into private property eventually. So taking all that into account, the refresh project was established by the town and the county. Lee County provided a unique opportunity for collaboration. They decided that they were going to go in, they wanted to improve the sanitary system as well as provide streetscape and stormwater improvements within Carroll Boulevard. Those stormwater improvements, it provided an opportunity for the town to discharge of any of that extra runoff through town right-of-way and out to the bay. Presented an opportunity for the town to look at areas that could be that could benefit from a new stormwater system, an interconnected system going through the right-of-way to collect water and to look for areas that might benefit from treatment, from collection, from conveyance, everything. Here's some stats based on those existing conditions that we had talked about. 26% of the town's roadways were maintained for stormwater. That means that a rough number of amount of road that actually had something that was stormwater related on. 83% of the town's outfalls were undersized or non-existent. And the existing system didn't provide collection or conveyance or anything like that to get water within the whole right-of-way. It was usually an isolated area that was getting the water and taking it out, and there were a lot of low pocket areas. Another issue we were seeing was the swale systems that were developed early on when development happened. Through time, property owners encroach into the right-of-way and they build, and sediment builds up, and that starts to block any water and any potential for the water to get out to the bay, where ideally it would be, and not flooding property owners or right-of-way. Another thing to think about is the state stormwater regulation. Florida has been mandated by the federal government that the need to improve water quality where possible. This involves engaging the Florida DEP as well as the South Florida Water Management District. It's through those entities that state permits are provided for stormwater projects. At a very minimum, they require that a net benefit be shown in terms of water quality and in terms of the project results. Ultimately, it comes down to the local municipalities to develop the projects. They're the ones that are putting the projects into action. They're doing the development review, and they're checking to make sure that the projects that they do meet water quality standards or provide this net benefit.
Tim, if I might ask you,
Sure.
is it, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it fair to say that if we would not have taken action, the feds and the state would have come in and mandated that we take some action?
It's potential that that's possible. So there are certain regions within the state that are under mandate. that process. That's the Basin Management Action Plans, where you have, like, the Caloosahatchee would be the closest map that's related to this. The watersheds, the watershed, all the water that's draining into the Caloosahatchee River, all the communities involved with that get a mandate if there are any issues, pollutant levels within the receiving water body. So they have total maximum daily loads of pollutants that can enter into that waterway, or else it becomes an impaired water body, and that's where the mandate process happens. So Fort Myers Beach's location right now is not within that map, that Caloosahatchee River or the Western Everglades map. There is potential that as things progress, that the scope of area covered by that is Fort Myers Beach, being a barrier island community, really isolates from that river watershed area. Water bodies that we're talking about for Fort Myers Beach are the Estero Bay, Gulf of Mexico. So in the event that either of those become impaired, there is a potential that Fort Myers Beach would fall under that. And if that's the case, we can look back and we can see projects that have been done, and you can get credits for those projects. So we are doing what we regulation that might come through regarding water quality, that would kind of leave town out in the open and find other projects. And it gets difficult because the amount of build out in the town, really limited area that you can implement the water quality projects. Really, what we're doing is what ultimately could be done by putting in the sediment boxes, and we can get to that further on about what we're doing in terms of water quality.
I want to address the councilor's question directly, though. Monroe County was put under a state mandate to install stormwater throughout the county. Now, that's for the state, a pretty heavy-handed approach. To do that, they gave them a time limit, which they extended because the municipalities and the county couldn't meet it, but they were actually under a state mandate to do that. I don't know if the state views that as something successful that they would roll out to other locations throughout the state, or was painful, so painful that they're reluctant to roll that out. But that's not something that we should just say, oh, we never have to worry about that. It's not something we should lose sleep about every night, but it's definitely out there. What we're doing is by addressing the known needs, voluntary basis, we're positioning ourselves so that if the state were to decide to move in that direction in other jurisdictions, we wouldn't be at the bottom of the ladder. We would be in the middle towards the top, and they'd have theoretically other places to go look at first.
Fair to say also, Roger, that by doing it in conjunction with the Estero Boulevard renovation, it's such a smart way to do it, because we're obviously going to have to tear everything up, as opposed to if the state were to come in later and mandate it, then we would have already renovated Estero Boulevard. In other words, the timing of this makes a lot of sense with Estero Boulevard being renovated as dramatically as it has been. Is that fair?
Well, it's definitely fair to say that it presented an opportunity for collaboration. Clearly, county's project would have been a lot more difficult to do without the town's participation, because how would they have gotten the water from Estero Boulevard? They would have to either run it off either end of Estero Boulevard, which would have been a long, difficult challenge of the project. By allowing them to use our side streets, which also led us to improve our certain side streets, made that project a lot easier for them to engineer and complete. and offered an ancillary benefit to the town that we also were addressing issues that we had on some of our local streets that were inadequate as part of that. So you had the opportunity for collaboration from an engineering standpoint and then also from the fiscal standpoint. So it would have been unwise not to take advantage of that opportunity once Lee County decided to go forward and do the Refresh Estero project.
I think that's very well said, and that's sort of the purpose of this exercise this morning is ratepayers will see rates increase for stormwater. It's helpful for them to understand the foundational benefits as to why this is good public policy. So this is all very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that answer.
Just one question, some of you said. So Estero Bay is not considered an imperiled waterway now?
Correct, that's my understanding. At the Caloosahatchee River, at Estero Bay is not at the moment.
Good news. You ought to put an exclamation point at the end of that one.
Looking at that opportunity that we talked about, the timing of it with Estero Boulevard getting improved and having that drainage to get it out through the town and not have the county doing a closed system that only handles their water. We did some analysis to make sure that the town had all of the pieces in place for this to all be successful. So we did stormwater analysis for the joint outfalls in conjunction with the county's engineering efforts. So we would get their results and we would run that through the system that we're proposing. Then work with them to identify the best locations for where the outfalls could be. Like Roger said, putting a drain out at either end of the island wasn't going to work, so you have to have intermediate drains out the project to make sure you have a good, steady, average flow out of that system down Estero Boulevard. So worked with them on that. We also developed a facilities plan for SRF funding so that the project could be funded through that vehicle and then paid back by the town through the stormwater utility. Following the facilities plan and the Estero Boulevard analysis, we then looked into the town side streets themselves and did a basis of design report, which included 30% design for stormwater that would go throughout the town. Then, based on those projects, we did a prioritization analysis looking at different key factors that we could take into account, which the table there shows the basic idea of how that scoring was done, and then rank those projects based on the score to get a project prioritization for town projects that we're forward with. This next slide is something that we've shown to council previously, way back when we were doing the outfall selection process. Modeling was performed, locations were discussed and determined. We looked at factors on the town side, including how much watershed area or drainage basin area was going to be feeding into the system, and really trying to find the Goldilocks streets where they needed help, but they weren't such a big area that they needed a lot of help, because if you get a big slug of water coming from Estero Boulevard and you already have a big basin, it really limits the size of pipe that you can put in, and try to keep that within a outfall size.
I think it's very important from a technical standpoint. There's a sweet spot of pipe size that you don't want to exceed in terms of outfalls. So we had to sort of evaluate how much water we were going to get from Estero Boulevard, how much water that we could add into that pipe to make sure that we didn't exceed the capacity of that pipe size. So once we go over a particular pipe size, it triggers a whole bunch of additional regulatory actions that are required. You don't want to ourselves in a position to have to deal with all of that. So the actual outfall size was a critical element in sort of working backwards to see how much water we could put in that pipe.
Exactly.
You found along the way that you've had to go back and add stuff maybe that didn't quite cover what you had hoped it would during the modeling phase of this?
Ideally, no, of course. We want to make sure that we're capturing everything. There are a few areas that after construction or during construction, we found that like there's a low-lying area between two driveways or something where we add a yard drain. That drainage basin area is accounted for in the model, so more a matter of getting the water into the system was already sized and ready for that water to get there. It's just getting there. There might be a few areas here and there needed a few additions of drains or like that.
Well, we did do some field modifications, and those were generated from two sources. One is town and through Kay's company had a community meeting as we did each of the streets, and we laid out the plans. And people came to that meeting, and they would look at them and say, "Is that the drain?" And someone from the staff would say, "Yeah, that's where the drain's going to go." And they say, "Well, it really needs to go over here, because here's where the problem is." We would go back and look at it, and in fact, if that was correct, we would adjust it there. In some cases, it was a field adjustment to, there was a beautiful tree, and the drain was going to, or a pipe was going to force us to take out a beautiful tree that had been there a long time. We'd make a field adjustment, move it a couple feet one way or the other to try to avoid having to move a tree that a homeowner and the community was particularly attached to. So we did a bunch of things like that, and we were very fortunate up till September 30th to have an employee who was extremely experienced to handle that field work for us and those adjustments.
Of the stuff that's been completed, and now that it's had a chance to be there for a while, have you noticed anything that you're going to have to go back and add additional drains or dig up again and start adding things?
We're not dig up again and add things, but we had like on, I forget what street it is, there's one street that was still getting flow from Estero. It was close to, it was like the second line in off Estero, was still getting flow from Estero. We just installed a cross drain. So we had an existing drain on one side of the street, just went across the street and added another drain, like on the other side, to then drain into the main pipe that was going down. And that was, we're not sure if it was to the way the was designed or changes that the property owners had made since the original design, but there was water being collected there. And so we came in and we just made that adjustment. We're looking at the street, and basically, once it's in, we're going back out there to see how well it's working. And if we see an opportunity to make things better, we want to do it now, and then hopefully we're done with that street for 25 or 30 years, you know. But for the most part, those have been rare and few between.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the results of all the analysis that we've done and the coordination with the county has gotten us to where we can prioritize projects. And so that's what's here on these next couple slides, where the first priority was to get the water from Estero Boulevard, this county water and the town water, out to the bay. So construction is nearing completion. The final outfall is on Linnell. That is in and functioning, and they're doing restoration work right now, and that will wrap up the Estero Boulevard side street drainage project.
This includes not just draining the county water, but anything along that pipe.
Right, exactly. So that system ties in at Estero Boulevard, and then as it goes through town right away, we have intermediate drains along there and cross drains that collect the water that's in town right of way. And it all ends up discharging through a sediment box for water quality purposes out through an outfall, which we provide with a tidal backflow preventer.
It's very important that everyone remembers that we made a few minutes ago. And that is that you could think of these outfall pipes, sort of like a case. So when you start to pack for your trip, the first water we put in was the Estero Boulevard water. And we said, okay, how much room is left in the suitcase for our side street water? So the side street systems were designed so that capacity of the suitcase could accommodate it, but not anymore. So people say, well, why'd you stop here and not there? It was all because we were understanding what the capacity of that outfall pipe was.
How much of this cost was paid for by the county?
The county, the deal that was made was based on some averages, calculations, and, you know, I don't know that they were necessarily perfect calculations, in my opinion. They are what they are. They were in place when I got here. They roughly pay about 20%, is that correct?
20,000 an outfall.
Oh, they pay 20,000 per outfall without, it's not based on, I guess, who generates the volume.
What's been the average outfall cost?
Well, we have, how many? We have
No, we have sort of 16.
16, so
An
16,
outfall.
so you 16 into 10.1 million.
So
Okay. Continue.
right.
So the first priority is basically complete, and now Tim will talk about the second priority.
Right, so the second priority then was looking at the town itself and what stormwater improvements we did the town based on that basis of design report and the 30% design. So 15 streets came out from that, which we've deemed the tier 1 side streets. That also includes the North Estero Phase 2 project. Budgeted for that is $15 million. Tier 1 projects the design is complete, and we are preparing to put a bidding on that in the near future once the North Estero projects have gotten a little further along. Also included in the second priority was the town outfall improvements. The design for this is included in the tier 1 project, just to get some economies of scale with the contractor, having it all under the same contractor and getting out there and doing work at individual outfalls. So, as I had mentioned previously, there's a lot of streets that have a single catch basin with a pipe that goes out to the bay or out to a canal. What we've designed is improvements to that outfall that include some kind of water quality improvement, either providing a sump, so an area in the box that's below the pipe, sediment to collect, or a sediment box that we can a picture of a few slides. And then as well as putting tidal backflow on those outfalls to keep that tidal water from creating the system with water. North Estero Phase 2 is under construction. It's been split into 2 parts. Part 2 is going first, actually, which are the streets on either side of downtown. That includes Carlos, Matanzas, and Lagoon, as well as Primo, Palermo, and Santos. Future projects that the town can undertake based on funding availability would be any of the Tier 2 projects that came out of that analysis and design. Those are already at a 30% design completion. And an example of some of these other streets is Lover's Lane, which has kind of been the topic of conversation from the basis of design report. It was a Tier 2 project. Council has agreed to move it to a Tier 1 based on provided an amount that could work towards that. We're still working through the cost benefit to make sure that work that gets done is within a reasonable level for the amount of homes that are on the street. There are some constructability and access issues that even if we have the money, still present some problems that need to be overcome regardless of the amount of money that gets allotted for the project. There are other streets that may come up in that Tier 2 that it might not be that we do all the Tier 2 projects at one. It just depends on council, it depends on staff. And once we get through these first and second priority projects, taking another look and seeing how do we want to prioritize these Tier 2 projects. And then the stormwater on Times Square will be performed as a part of the Times Square hardscaping project. I wanted to talk through some of the system benefits. I know I've kind of touched on them as we've gone through this. We've got the added collection that's provided with inlets and an interconnected system. We provide more conveyance, more capacity so that we can handle larger storm events and meet the level of service that's been established by the town within their stormwater master plan. There should be less standing water because of that additional collection that we're providing. We're also improving water quality, mostly through the sediment boxes where there's available right-of-way or available easement area. You can see they include that sumped area sediment collection, but they also include this floatable screen that collects any floatables and traps them in there to get cleaned out at a later time. It also includes oil skimmer. And as I said, as we say here, we've got up to 80% total suspended solid removal and 19% nutrient removal. That includes total nitrogen, total phosphorus removal.
How does this remove dissolved nitrogen?
So that's mostly through the dropping out of the sediment. It's collecting through the boom. It's getting through the and everything, and it's collecting that nitrogen.
The nitrogen is bonding with the sediments?
Right.
Okay, so just the interesting little device you've got here. So the water flows in, drops down. There's a grater screen there so that all the floating sediments or the and whatever are stay on the top.
Correct.
Right? It goes down and there's a half level, so the sediments will be in the lower level. The water without the sediments will flow across the top and then go around that last gate and out.
Correct. And then in a high flow condition, it functions just like a section of pipe that goes through there. So the ideally during the 90th percentile of storms, treating the water and it's collecting the water, but in the big storms at some point, it just acts like a pipe where we just need to get it out, and this isn't going to hold up the water or back anything up. So you do lose your efficiencies as the flows go up, but in the majority of storms, you're seeing treatment of the water as it goes.
I assume that oil skimmers probably don't work very well with high flow.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it all kind of breaks down when you get the higher flows, but ideally, we're getting that treatment. It is dependent on the maintenance schedule too.
What is that maintenance schedule, Tim? And how often do you clean the sediment boxes? And what do you find what is the sediment itself? What do you find in that mix?
The sediment's mostly going to be sand that's coming off the road, anything else that's going to drop out, any heavy split matter. But like I said, mostly sand and yard debris, things like that in this area. Maintenance schedule that we recommend is to go out. At first, you don't know how much it's going to get until you start looking at it. So we recommend going out every 6 months to take a look and see, basing your schedule on that.
One of the things that Roger pointed out, the meeting I was with him the other day, was that we look at water quality, which is obviously very important to our island, given what we experienced in 2018. One of the advantages of having a system, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Tim, is that if we had a spill or a crisis of some sort, where there's a chemical spill, et cetera, having a system like this would allow us to preemptively capture that, close those pipes, and then and capture that waste before it goes into the bay or the ocean. Is that fair?
That is. It's when you get it into a system that's connected and interconnected, really identify where those points are, keep it contained. Not, then you know exactly where that discharge point is, and it's spreading out or going large area out into the bay or whatever.
Are there any other water quality issues that you improved as a result of this new system, given what we had before?
I mean, we're hitting most of the targets that we can. The nutrient removal and the total suspended solid and the floatables are pretty much what you look at in terms of stormwater quality.
Counselor, a year ago, we raised the maintenance budget for stormwater. It came a little bit of an issue for people to understand why we had to do that. Well, clearly, the more of these boxes we add the construction process, the more of these boxes that have to be checked and cleaned on a periodic basis. So that's the main reason why that number grew a year ago. And as we complete the phase 2 of Estero and the Tier 1 streets, there'll be another bump up of that in the future. And that was contemplated in the rate analysis that was recently completed and shared with the council, which contemplated a system of rate adjustments over the years to keep pace with that, because clearly if these boxes are not maintained, the 19% nutrient removal and the 8% suspended, that won't work if they're not maintained. So they're only as good as our maintenance once they're in.
More system benefits include the increased sediment collection within the inlets themselves. Like I said, we're adding 1 to 2 feet of sediment chamber within each box as it goes. So those will get maintained well. And as it collects upstream of the sediment boxes, then that provides more opportunity for sediment boxes to go longer without needing to be. Most of the rest of this talks about backflow prevention. So ideally we're putting a duckbill backflow preventer at the outfalls. They keep the bay from coming onto the island, a one-way check valve, as well as means for controlled drawdown of storm surge. So what that means is everything that we're doing, we can't build a wall around the entire island and keep everything out. And so at some point, a big hurricane or storm surge, the water's going to get up to whatever elevation it might be, 5, 6. Flood elevation for the island is around 11. As that water comes up, everybody's flooding. That water's going to recede at some point. Ideally, we can get it into this system, and as the tide comes in, it doesn't go into, not going to go into the island. It's just going to have that water going out instead of going over your seawalls or wherever it might go, or finding its low point and blowing out a portion of the seawall or whatever it might be. And then we also wanted to touch on the water quality sampling, that it is being performed. Samples are sent to Lee County for testing. Provides the results of that testing.
Could you repeat that one more time, please?
Yeah, so water quality, the sampling is done by town staff. It's sent to Lee County. Lee County does the testing.
Thank you.
For them, yeah.
What happens to the sediment that you pull out of these traps?
So we use basically a huge vacuum cleaner. And that stuff is, and then what's pulled out of there is disposed of through the county's waste disposal system.
I have the opportunity, look is watching, I can address maybe that we,
Happened?
Yeah, that's for installation of the device. It's dropped in. So it's there for that removal and maintenance.
Part of mooring field.
Right.
Christie, while you're up there, I just did a quick question, I'll get grief from a constituent if I don't ask you this. One of the outfalls at the end of Fairweather, there's a lot of metal, steel, iron, whatever it is, and it was crumbling. It literally like powdered up because I assume the salt water has an impact. It was replaced, I think, with the same metal again. Are these outfalls having similar problems throughout the island in terms of is the metal work that's done all deteriorating like that, or is that an anomaly?
so actually, Timothy and I went together to address the Fairweather outfall. And it's been replaced with aluminum at this point.
What was replaced
It
with
was
aluminum?
replaced with
Oh,
aluminum,
very good.
correct.
Okay.
But typically, we don't use aluminum because it's more expensive. But when we have situations like that, we go and replace it with aluminum.
Is there something unique about that location that caused it to crumble like that, or do you have any idea what?
I don't think necessarily there was anything that,
Old.
I mean,
think
other
that
than the
was
salt
part of the
water.
new
and
system.
No, right.
They're set up differently at this
So the
point.
way that these outfalls perform is a notch is cut out of basically. So the water is discharging out through this lower lip. It has grates on top of it, and it has manatee protection bars out in front of it. So it's susceptible to the salt water because of its proximity to right there on. So that they're unique in the fact that they're within that first basin-based neighborhood formed. Any falls are fitted outfall that has the backflow prevent grading.
What's the cost, Roger? You said the cost is more expensive. We're doing it twice and replacing it the second time with aluminum. How much are we really saving by not putting in aluminum? I'm just curious because I remember seeing the pictures of what you were talking about, and someone doesn't notice one of those is deteriorating and falls through because it's rusted away. I gotta believe that's gonna be.
Yeah, that design, we've gone away from that design, so we don't have, that was done at the first, sort of the very beginning phases of this. We've gone away from that design, so we don't have too many, and as they deteriorate, they'll be replaced with aluminum, but I don't know why aluminum wasn't put there initially. It could very well that the ones that they put in could have lasted 15 years, just didn't. It wasn't that it had a 3-year shelf life and they put it in because it was cheaper. They had no idea how long it would last.
How many of these are we talking that are still to
I
be
have no
replaced?
idea. This is the first one we've heard of.
Well, I know it's been talked about in previous meetings quite a bit, but we just wanted to touch on the budget for the stormwater improvement. At the SRF loan provides the upfront funding of the project. Then the loan payments are made through the stormwater utility. The breakdown of what that new approved rate schedule is. Also wanted to touch on the town water main improvements while we were here and just give a status update of that, not only Estero Boulevard, but what's going to be happening on the town. So phases 1 through 3 construction is complete on the water main on Estero Boulevard. Phase 4 is nearing completion. Everything is online and functioning, and service has been turned over on phase 4, mainly just the abandonment and the removal of the existing main that's remaining. Town side streets, the plan is to replace all of the water mains within town right-of-way. The side street outfall projects has provided an opportunity where the water and the storm can be done concurrently, and so we basically go in and tear up the street once, tie it in, put whatever stub outs are needed for future connections on other streets, then button it up, and then that's it for that street during that process. The remaining side streets are slotted to, the work is slotted to be performed once the town's stormwater projects are complete. So after the North Estero, after the Tier 1, then we'll look at going in and just doing water main work for what's remaining. And same story on funding for this, that there's SRF funding in place. That is what the construction, and the water utility is paying back the SRF loan. Wanted to kind of summarize everything with a map to go through this history that we've talked about of when projects have been completed and when they're slated to be. This is how everything started. The first phase that was completed was up at North Estero. We did stormwater work there and water work. Then we have Basin Base neighborhood is shown in orange, and down at the bottom is the Bay Beach water improvements that were provided. Next two phases are the Estero Phase 2 and the Estero Phase 2 side streets, shown in green. Following that, we have Phase 3 Estero Boulevard, as well as Phase 3 side streets. Phase 4 Estero Boulevard and Estero Boulevard are the Phase 4 side streets. Did the work within Laguna Shores and Linnell. Under construction currently is North Estero Phase 2 Part 2, shown in purple up at the north end of the island. Following that, North Estero Phase 1, or Phase 2 Part 1, work will be completed, which covers downtown, that's Crescent, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, those streets on the end. Following that is the Tier 1 stormwater improvements, which will include water main on those streets as well, as we'd mentioned. Following that, remaining water lines for the remainder of the island. This is the website for all of the updates to the project, and that's kept up by our public information. Are there any questions?
I have a question, Tim. There's been a lot of discussion. People have asked me what's going on in that particular spot, just south of Santini Plaza there, just before you get into Laguna Shores, where it's really hot and heavy going back in through behind Bay Beach.
Okay.
Just want to touch on that for a minute.
In terms of stormwater, or in terms of construction, or?
Yeah, both.
So
No, they've cut through back towards the bay in a wide swath. There's all kinds, they've made a road actually going through there back in,
Right by
Behind-
Fishtail Marina, yeah.
just below, just south of Fishtail Marina there, right before you get to Laguna Shores. Oh, that's not part of it. Okay, well,
Right.
well, there's the explanation, okay.
Now, just to be clear, there's joint outfalls and then there's county-only outfalls. So all the joint outfalls that we were doing as part of the Refresh Restore project are done. In fact, some of you may remember, the county was always anxious for us to stay ahead of them,
Yes.
so they would have a place to dewater as their project got up to our side street. In certain other locations, they decided just to have a direct outfall themselves. And the ones at the south end of the island are primarily those types of facilities.
Right. We had 2 that were in phase 3 that went through town right of way, but there's a canal just beyond.
Close to
Estero,
Estero.
Very close, and so they opted to do county only, where they just went down and turned, opted into the canal. Same story here in phase 4, where they've got a few locations where the canals are proximate to Boulevard, or they've needed closer spacing on the outfalls and have had to go to private property owners at their own easements to get that water out. So they've got something going with something different.
Thank you. Kay wants to say.
Public information, and I don't necessarily want to speak for exactly where their outfalls are, but their outfall for Bay Beach, we call it within the team the Bay Beach Lane outfall. It is not at Bay Beach. It is beyond Bay Beach property.
Yes.
I know they're doing some work at Santa Maria condo there, in between the condos that are there in Bella Lago, and then beyond.
Seems to be like a major one.
It is.
It's a major, okay, thank you.
Has any effort been made to find some land, either land that the town has a right of way on, or could partner with somebody like Bay Beach Lane to build basins to absorb the water instead of send it directly out to the bay?
It's really based on development, and like I said, there's a limited lot of area, and we have to be able to get the water to that area. So being a flat island makes it tricky as far as what area you could serve by having a property, purchasing a property, let's say, and building a basin. That a lot of different things kind of line up for it to be and make like diamond in the rough, or the needle in the haystack would be a better analogy.
Well, if I could jump in, I was here when we did the initial stuff, and we were presented with several different ideas of stormwater management. And one of them was called the Cadillac Plan. And we had huge public outcry that it was too expensive, but it actually did, and I don't know whether it involved basins, I don't remember the details of it, but it did involve more cleaning of the water at that point. But we had huge public outcry that it was too expensive, and the council at that time pulled back to a lesser expensive plan rather than using the Cadillac Plan. So other things were explored at the time, just so that you know.
And I'm not saying that, I know we're a long, skinny, heavily developed island. There's not a lot of opportunities. But I do know there are some instances where the town has some right-of-way. And I understand that these sediment traps may collect some of dissolved nitrogen, but dissolved nitrogen is dissolved in the water. So that means that unless it's ideal conditions, it's gonna float right through and get to the back bay. And dissolved nitrogen is a problem. I was just wondering if we really explored the idea, because I know, not as a total solution, but as every little bit helps. So if you have a place where you kill a small hunk of right-of-way, which I know exists even in the old parts of town, we could direct water to, and then like they usually do, build a grade up to a certain level. And I'm saying, I know the ship has already sailed on most of this. Or looked at, try to work with the Bay Beach people, because they have quite a bit of land that could potentially do, but we would probably have to pay for that.
If I may, Danny Nelson with Tetra Tech, and to that point, and I know when we were discussing with Bay Beach, that was talked about. They do. We did talk about partnering with. That was looked at. We don't have a map here, but one of the challenges is that nearly every street is its own basin. So when we're looking at moving water, you would likely have to pump it somewhere. You're adding an additional cost for that. There is a ridge, within the island, and I think it's about midway or close to that. Nearly, when we looked at the stormwater and we laid out the entire area as far as geographically and geography, we've got many basins that are here. So you're almost isolated to being its own system because of that. So that's part of the challenge as well. So moving that water somewhere, you would larger cost, to move that likely by pumps and multiple pumping systems. But they did look at
One last question. Kay, if you could just come up one sec, I have just a couple quick things. Kay, how many people are on your blast email list on the island in terms of updates on the project?
Yeah,
Ballpark.
I know we've probably got I know there's over 1,000.
Would you?
Some of them are not on the island. I would have to really check that number, because we literally have about 5 different spreadsheets that we
It's
send
okay,
out
it's
to.
okay. But would you take the highlights of this presentation today, put them in lay terms as to the benefits of this new system? Could you blast that out to your readership? I mean, the timing of this would be fortuitous in that we are imposing modest rate increases. I think there's a lot of new people to the island that don't understand historically all the benefits that town is deriving from this project. I think we've got a pretty good synopsis here, not just the drainage advantages, but also the water quality advantages. If you could put that in lay terms and blast that out, I think that would be timely given the fact that we're about to experience some rate increases.
Okay. Yep.
That'd be great. Thank
I would
you.
also suggest maybe we have our PIO send out her contact information, because I do know some constituents who have asked me about what's going on, and I try directing them to her non-specifically. But that would be good to have her to contact people to let her know that get on your mailing list if they want to know what's going on.
I just think it's important, Key, that we tell the story.
Yeah, we do.
We can't just assume everybody knows everything we've just learned this morning.
I understand. And we put everything that we put out on anything, paper, email, whatever, has our contact information on it. So I think that we've done, a good job of getting that out, because we do get emails back from people when we send out our weekly email. We get questions that come back. I think people at this point know where to go back if they're having an issue during construction. But yes, certainly the public education.
Great, thank you.
And not to contradict the presenter, but I just want to clarify something, that Estero Bay is considered imperiled. The presenter said he wasn't sure, but it is, which speaks to the urgency of getting a stormwater.
One other thing that you all are aware of, but perhaps everyone isn't, and that is that this relatively small town has made a huge investment into its infrastructure. And besides the state helping us in terms of low-cost financing, they have also given us some grants to help us do this project, and every year we go back to them and ask them for more help. So I do want to acknowledge our Lee County delegation in terms of their help, and Tallahassee in terms of helping us get funding, at least help us bear some of the costs of this system, because you all know that Fort Myers Beach is not only where we live and work and play, but where a lot of Lee County comes to play and work, and the other 66 counties, as well as other states and other countries, people come here. So we're taking on a burden to protect our environment for them, not only now, but going into the future.
Roger, did I hear you say that the town's portion of this is completed? Just the outfall
Portion
part.
of the joint project with the county is complete.
What is the town still left of all of this stuff that he just went through? What is the town?
Okay, so just going back through that. So the Tier 1 streets were the streets that were identified that have flooding issues, that were not a joint street with the county. So they were the streets that were not tied into Estero that have flooding issues. The designs are being wrapped up, and they will be our next construction project after the current construction project. Current construction project is the phase 2 stuff, which is the purple and pink stuff at the top left of the map. The Tier 1 is I believe the blue stuff, if I remember correctly. The sky blue color. That would be the next. Tier 2 are streets that cost benefit would have to be studied further to determine which ones we might want to proceed there. So that will be something for us to talk about in the future, as we complete phase 2 and on Estero side streets, and then the Tier 1s, and that would be the next decision point, whether we go in and start doing some of those streets or not.
Just wonder if it'd be beneficial on something like this, if we're going to push it out to the public, have something in there delegating who's doing what or who's responsible for what, just for people that have questions. They maybe will help them where they can direct their questions to. If it's a county question, that can go there. If they
Well,
Just
one of the
trying to
things
help.
we did was by hiring, look, the county hired a case company and we hired case company so that people wouldn't get ping-pong back and forth if they had a question. So all public information, all questions related to all these projects are going through Kay and her company. We've done an excellent job in terms of responding to emails, meeting with constituents on the streets who just wanted to know, is my mailbox going to be affected or not, and so on and so forth. So, and then we have in turn, in some of our own projects, have hired Kay just to try to make sure that we do have sort of a central point of that public information.
Just one final, just to follow up on Roger's statement about the funding of the project. We were on a conference call ourselves a week or so ago with State Representative Ray Rodriguez, soon to be State Senator Ray Rodriguez, and he assured us that although money is tight this year in the budget, it's going to be a tough budget year up in Tallahassee because of the COVID situation, that he will certainly be in there swinging for us for our continued funding on these projects, particularly the stormwater, our portion of it. But with that being said, I want to thank Christy and Danny and Tim and Kay for your presentation this morning. It was very informative. I hope it answered a lot of questions for everybody, and we look forward to continuing the project and keeping everything going as well as it has been.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Christy, could we all get a copy of the PowerPoint? That'd be great, thank you.
I mean, Mr. Mayor, real quick, Kay, I just wanted to make, just bring a point to you that I've noticed, and some other people have brought it up to me, that there's the bottles, plastic bottles being left behind by some of the workers on the barrels, and people are picking them up. I've picked up some myself. I don't know if it's possible to maybe have some garbage cans strategically placed around for them to put the stuff in. I mean, we're trying to educate the people as to why this is so important for stuff getting in the water, and it's kind of counterproductive when they're picking up Gatorade bottles and water bottles from workers, and they're out there working hard and they're trying to stay hydrated, but it's just maybe would look a little better if we're not picking those.
We hear this a lot. And I will tell you that in my line of work, we hear both sides of the story. I do agree that there are times when the contractors are leaving bottles around. We've had chicken bones, we've had 7-Eleven boxes, everything. Guys do make a concerted effort. However, there are times when us as the PIO are saying, look, we're getting a great influx of these calls. Please go out, get the trash. They're supposed to keep trash cans with them. They're supposed to be picking it up. They forget. We will certainly remind them again if you're hearing. But on the opposite side of that, once construction is gone, we're still going to have that issue. And I think that probably Chelsea can probably attest to that, that there are people that just drop trash. So while yes, we're here and we're getting blamed for it, and we're certainly willing to pick up our trash and others' trash, you know, we will be doing that. And thank you, because I will remind them again.
I appreciate
They
it.
get
And I wasn't
less.
trying to blame anybody. It was just,
No, I understand.
perception is if it's sitting on an orange barrel,
I know.
that's where it came from.
I know, we always say if construction is there, it's our fault, whether it's water quality or it's raining cats and dogs, but yes, we will certainly do that. And I just want to say a little bit about how our company works. We're not a public relations firm. We aren't marketing something. We are public information for road and infrastructures projects only. So we know, I know more about water shutoffs and what needs to be done and what the amount of PSI is, before you have to issue a boil water notice. I spent last Tuesday, a US 41 water main broke, and we were at 9:45 trying to get a boil water notice out on an emergency basis. So we are able to talk to some of these folks about why there's a drainage here or why your water has to be shut off, and explain that to them. And it keeps the contractor and the engineers working on their portion of the project. So that's how we work. We set this up. We originally, our firm started working for the town of Fort Myers Beach first. We started working on the basin-based neighborhood. We set this up with the intention of knowing that Estero Boulevard, Lee County was going to come along, and we named it Refresh Water Lines. But as we morphed on with that, it became Refresh Estero Boulevard for Lee County's portion. Now we call the website Refresh FM Beach. So it has morphed. There has been a plan all along to try to consolidate these and try to get one point of contact so people are getting accurate information. So just so you all are aware, I know it's a new council, just to make sure. If you have any questions.
It's a great
just call me.
history. That's a great history right there, Kay.
And I have to say that in my multiple years on council, I have sent many people to Kay and to her website, et cetera. I have never had anybody come back and complain that they didn't get satisfaction. So they've done a great job, and I really appreciate it.
And I can attest to that, but before I was elected and the construction was going by in front of my house, I had a couple of comments and they were always responsive. So thank you for that, Kate. That's the one you need to hear sometimes.
All right. Thanks again, everybody. Okay, we'll continue on here. The next item, B, is New Year's Eve fireworks. Roger, you want to start us out on this one?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we're 75 or so days out, the end of the year, and I have to say that we'll be asking council to take irrevocable action on Monday, but we're getting to the point where we'll have to spend some staff resources and money to begin the permitting process if it's the council's intent for us to try to do a fireworks show for New Year's Eve. Clearly, none of us here can know what the situation will be health-wise, at the end of December. But it's important that we have a plan in place, and that the community and others are aware of that so that they can do their planning, or partners like the fire department, et cetera. So there's an opportunity for council to give us some input on whether we want to be optimistic and start planning and proceeding, assuming that things will be safe enough to have the New Year's Eve fireworks show.
I guess I can start. You're right. No one has a crystal ball. obviously. But from all indications, from what I'm hearing from all the health officials and everything else, Florida is having a resurgence in cases, as is a lot of the other areas of the country right now. We all know that there's not going to be a vaccine available by the end of the year, at least not available to general population in the way that it has to be. So we know those two already. So with that being known, what's changed? What's changed? So I'll take comments from everybody else and see where you are with that. We didn't allow it for 4th of July because we didn't want to pack people into to Times Square, which was smart. I think that's the wise and smart thing to do for 4th of July as well. If there's an alternative to that, be it shooting off a barge in the middle of the island, spreading people all out through the island, I'm open to listening to those sort of discussions. But short of that, I don't see how anything has changed. Council members.
Just have a question for Roger before I comment. Roger, could you update us contractually where we're at with this fireworks firm? Is it a use it or lose it dynamic? Can we bank it for later in the spring? How are we contractually?
Right now, the contractual arrangement was, we basically put half down, and they have said that we can go anytime from July 4th through December 31st. Or we lose the half we put down, which was roughly 10,000. That's where we're at. Now, obviously, if we start spending money in permitting and other things, that amount goes up. But the main cost is in the fireworks itself. Other costs are relative to the cost of the fireworks and ordering the shells and that type of thing.
Just to kind of clarify in this question, so we put 10,000 down, we have another 10,000 to pay the final payment, and then what kind of costs would be involved in all the other sundry things, the security?
I'm going to guess neighborhood of $5,000 plus or minus.
Well, at risk at the moment is the 10,000. We're not on the hook for 20.
We pay 10, we would have to, we have to authorize them to buy the shells, which would be the other 10.
The other 10.
And the ancillary sundry costs, whatever you want to call it, permitting, staff time, paying for permits at the county, FDOT, is probably $5,000.
I guess my position is I'd like to explore with the fireworks provider an option that how much more it might cost, that we might not have the traditional at Times Square situation. Maybe something, as has been suggested, more large at Mid-Island, or some, I'm not saying that's the one, but an idea. I'd like to see if there's some way that they could, without costing us a lot of extra money, move the display so that people might spread out more. If we could discuss that with them.
We can try to cost out the barge alternative and let you know what that would be, if that's what the.
I like that idea as well, and even if the display is actually smaller to account for the additional cost of the barge, I think just having something would be, if it's a 10-minute show versus a 20-minute show and it's on a barge and it's safe, I think people would still, I think there's a lot of people who want to celebrate the end of 2020 for a variety of reasons, and if it could be done safely, I think it's certainly worth exploring. I like Rexanne's idea, and I think it's a good one.
And if I remember the discussion we had when this came up last time, is that there were some difficulties with the barge because part of it is having with the Coast Guard out there to keep people away.
There are definitely challenges.
Yeah, because people tend to go right in the face of danger, especially when they're on a boat. I also like to maybe explore if there's a way we can work with the vendor to defer this again. They deferred it until New Year's. They're willing to defer it.
You can
further.
ask.
Well, I mean, we are a good customer of theirs over the years. As Garden State, right? The same one that we've been using all along. So, I mean, we do have a track record with them.
Has Bay Oaks been into as a possibility for the fireworks? It's an area that the town could control people getting too close.
We actually began to look at that as a possible alternative. We can investigate that, pick it up where we left it off. Requires different types of shells and so on and so forth. But we can look at that and see what that would entail. You know, I know the fire rescue district will have concern about the proximity of residential properties, but, you know, I think thought we were right, sort of on that borderline. I don't know if there's something we could do to give them a level of comfort that they would be okay with it or not. We can ask.
I guess the reason I went with the idea of more of a mid-island thing on the beach is 7 miles of beach is a lot of space to spread out, whereas I see Bay Oaks concentrating people more. My idea is I want to get people further apart. If everybody goes to Bay Oaks to watch, they're going to be closer together.
I think I remember too that the radius, the safety radius they needed was most of Bay Oaks. There wasn't room for people and the fireworks. I guess mid-island.
And I don't know where they would be watching from, and
Well, I mean, they do shoot up in the air pretty high. You can see them from pretty much anywhere. I see your point.
I'm just trying to predict
Sure.
where they might cluster.
I see your point too, Dan. I mean, if you shot them up there, you could close off the whole Bay Oaks complex to people going in there,
Sure.
and they'd still spread out. Could spread out along the beachfront and turn their chairs around, and look the other way instead of looking out over the Gulf.
Or
So,
sit on the sidewalk.
I mean,
or,
it
they
could be done. It could be done, and that's something definitely worth looking into. But I think what we're trying to avoid here is people getting into these tight areas and piling on top of each other. Bay Oaks, Times Square, places where we know people are going to pile on top of each other. That's the whole idea here, is to keep people away from each other. So, but it's worth exploring, and I know it's on the agenda for Monday's meeting. I don't know whether you'll have enough information. I know you won't have enough information by then to discuss that. So if you want to,
Well, we could defer, we'll see what we can get between now and then, and if we
Okay.
need to defer it on Monday, we will.
okay,
Have there
good.
been any conversations with Lee County as far as any permitting that may have to go through them and their willingness to provide permits? I know there was, with the boat races and stuff, that they weren't issuing any permits back then for things that were going to happen in October. I don't know if, depending on which route, if any route is taken, what their involvement would be, if there's conversations that need to be had with them about, are they willing to provide permits, or that might direct a lot of our discussion.
Well, I think Lee County's in the sort of same situation we're in, which was, until 2-3 weeks ago, everyone was sort of starting to loosen up things because, the people felt that things were starting to get better. Find out 2 or 3 weeks later that that's not true, and actually the opposite is true. I don't know if they've sort of shifted positions yet. I think that the real issue is even if you did it mid-island, whether it's Bay Oak or Barge or whatever, in all likelihood, you're still going to have a lot of people in Times Square at Lynn Hall Park, unless wherever we were doing the fireworks show wasn't visible there. So those areas are going to attract a lot of people on New Year's Eve, whether we have a fireworks show or not. And clearly, if some of the prognostications with regard to the spread getting worse, really that's not something we want to advocate for or encourage. But we can do some additional homework and you back that information to see if that provides you with a solution that you feel comfortable with.
Okay, while we're on it here, I think this bears repeating one more time. I know we talked about it at the last meeting. There's a lot of confusion in the town as to our mask portion of our emergency ordinance that covers the wearing of masks. People seem to think that because the governor passed his declaration that negated individual mask ordinances throughout the state on the county and municipal levels. It has not. It has not. And also, which means that our portion of that ordinance is still in effect to this day. And then the other portion is, well, people are saying that, well, you know, because the governor said that you don't have to pay these fines anymore and there's no more fines. Well, this was discussed at our last meeting by our attorney here, who informed us that, yes, the fines that were levied at that time and up to that date were for lack of a better word, forgiven by the governor, but that didn't mean anything going forward, as was explained to us by our attorney. So I've been informed by various people throughout the town that there are certain restaurants whose staff has stopped wearing the masks. They're in violation of our ordinance. Clear and simple. That's all there is to it. Plus, it's also bad business for them, because the word gets out on the island that so-and-so is restaurant, they're not wearing masks anymore. Guess what? People stop going there. People stop going there. They're afraid of what could happen. So if there's anything, Ron Herron, a town attorney, that you'd like to add to this, just to clarify this, just to put the next exclamation point on it, so we don't have to keep going over and over and over again.
Use your words, Mayor. Your emergency declarations still are in effect. They have not been superseded by the governor's executive order implementing Phase 3 reopening of the state. And to the extent that this community and other communities across the state will require facial coverings of individuals out in public, it is a valid order and enforceable.
Okay, thank you.
I would just kind of iterate too that regardless of what the regulations are, this hasn't gone away. And for an example, I know that there was a correspondence that went to us about a constituent he's not going to go out to any more restaurants now since it's fully open because he just felt he wasn't safe. I've also heard from somebody else about people canceling VRBO reservations because of this opening, because they didn't feel safe. I think that it makes good business sense to be overtly safe, make your customers feel safe in these times. And my wife and I were planning on going out to dinner tonight. We called a couple of restaurants we knew had outdoor dining. And we asked them how open they were. They said they were fully opened. We didn't make your reservations. So a lot of people are, and we went into one place, I went in to buy something fairly expensive. None of the staff was wearing masks. I turned around and walked out. So it not only is good from a safety standpoint to continue to take precautions, I think it's good from a business standpoint to make sure that people feel safe. And I've also talked to restaurants, people, when we've gone out, and some of them are saying that their August this year was better than their August last year. I've talked to hoteliers who say that they have all kinds of hotels that are really doing bad, including some people family members who run hotels. But the hotels and the vacation renters on the island have been doing well because people are looking for a safe vacation that they don't have to fly to, and it behooves us to maintain that level of safety to make people continue to feel and be safe. It's just good business from my standpoint.
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
If I may, one additional comment regarding what I just said. Not only is it the facial coverings when people are outside, but to your point and to that of Councilmember Veach, there's also provision within the town's emergency declaration that requires employees of restaurants to have facial coverings. There are some exceptions set forth in the emergency declaration. Those continue to be in place, are not superseded by the governor's orders, at least to date, and are enforceable by the town.
And I'm not threatening the restaurants. I'm just trying to clarify a misunderstanding. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, John, the fact of the matter that we haven't levied any fines to this date regarding any infractions of our ordinance doesn't mean that we can't. So if people say that it's a toothless ordinance or it's a paper lion or so forth, it's not. The penalties are there and can be levied by the town.
That is correct.
All right, that's enough on that. Okay, shall we move on to next item is discussion of ordinance prohibiting turtle sales.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. At council's direction, staff worked together to put together a draft ordinance that is in your packet. After the ordinance has been worked on and we submitted it for consideration or comment to various state agencies. We have a working relationship, including the FWC, Florida Wildlife, shortening of the actual full name, but most people know the FWC, the Florida Wildlife Commission.
Yes.
Initially through staff, Mr. Schutz, then through Mr. Schutz to me, we had communications with Florida Wildlife Commission, including their general counsel's office, and we've received correspondence back from them, which we provided to you in the packet and as a handout, indicating very clearly that they take the position that authority of the town to regulate the sale of wildlife is preempted to FWC, and therefore the town is without jurisdiction to or power to be able to enact this ordinance.
Does it appear that the FWC wants to work with us at all on this?
I was very adamant in my conversations with Ms. McDonald, who's the attorney who I communicated with. I said, look, this community believes it's been forced, it has been forced into considering the adoption of this ordinance because there's both a federal law and presumptively, according to your emails, state regulations that may or may not be aren't being enforced, and the lack of or the failure to enforce those regulations has pushed my town council to direct us staff to draft this ordinance. And if we can't do it, who does the general public go to? And in the most recent email, again, that's been distributed to you, Ms. McDonald responds in that regard. You asked how residents and visitors can report violations of federal state law on the sale of turtles. Residents and visitors may report any wildlife, fish, or boating violations to the Commission's Wildlife Alert Reward Program. I have provided a link below for further information on the program. Obviously, we can, if it's your direction, we'll put that on our website for a link for people to pursue or disseminate that information to educate the public. But at the beginning, she states that she did share with me her concerns that the proposed ordinance is preempted by Article 4, Section 9 of the Florida Constitution.
I've got a question. When you say this is FWC jurisdiction, does that mean that they're the only ones who can make an ordinance? That if we had an ordinance, it wasn't any stricter than theirs? We enforce it, or are they the only ones who could enforce it?
They're saying that they are the sole agency under the Florida Constitution that has the right to regulate the sale of wildlife in the state of Florida.
That means they're the only ones who can enforce it.
They're the only ones who can have regulations, whether of any nature, regarding the sale of wildlife. And in fact, they provided information to staff, primarily Mr. Schutz, indicating that this particular property, business owner, does in fact have a state license issued by FWC to sell these turtles.
So right now, there's no FWC rule saying they can't.
So if you have a permit from FWC, it is allowed.
And so the other agency that has a prohibition have been since turtles smaller than 4 inches?
That's the FDA. That's the federal a federal agency, and I informed Ms. McDonald of that statutory provision that we had found, and she was rather surprised that that regulation exists. She was not aware of it. I said, well, you know, again, theoretically, it would be someone would have to file a complaint with the FDA because they are the federal agency that has jurisdiction and enforcement rights of that particular federal statute.
Yep, go ahead, sorry. Go ahead, I was going to bring you up on what Murph reported on the segment.
Well, I had a talk with John last night about some things that we possibly could do. And, you know, it might not be a lot, but, you know, maybe the council could direct staff to draft a letter to this business owner, respectfully asking them to reconsider the sale of these turtles. I don't know what it is as far as profit to their business. Maybe that's something that simple that could sway them to no longer do it, and it'll no longer be an issue. I don't know if the rest of the council thinks that might be a good idea or maybe overstepping our bounds, but a respectful letter asking to take a look at it. And have these business owners been issued the same material that we have as far as in the information that has been presented to us of the harm it does if they get released into the salt water?
Well, and to those points, at the meeting yesterday, we had Rod Kroom, who's the owner of the establishment, come in and talk to us. And like John said, is that the FWC is claiming jurisdiction and they've given him permits for it. So legally, I don't see a whole lot of standing what we can do, but he did come to our meeting, he did talk to us, he is open to more education and providing, and looking at options to make this safer, to let people know that, you know, more about the turtles and their life and how long they live, as a way to try to help people understand what they're doing. He didn't really give us specific numbers about how many turtles he's selling. I think they're little hatchlings. I've compared the prices of what I see on the web compared to what he's talking about, and you know, for the $20 or so that he's charging, they're probably little 1 to 2 inch turtles. I've also, you know, I do have concerns, of course, because people that are on Murph and other people who live around freshwater ponds on the island have been seeing quite a bit of them in the freshwater. So they are out there. He claims that the ones he gets are 100% female, and so I guess it shouldn't technically be breeding, but they can live for decades. And so just a continual release could make it look like they are breeding, or one lucky male could happen in there and start a breeding program in any one of our ponds. To that end, Mitch has been in communication with the owner, and he is tentatively agreed to come up with an instructional video about the turtles that the guy would play on a loop in the store. I think it was not only the sale of the turtles that is the reason why he's doing it, the profit from the sales of the turtles, but it's a way to get people in the store. So right now he has a legal right and he has a business reason to do it. Although there's a moral right that I think is lacking in this. I don't know what power we have. And I think that the consensus in Murph was to let Rod Mitch work out some way to try to educate people as much as possible about what these are and make sure that they're provided with everything they need to properly care for the turtles instead of putting them in their pocket and walking out of a store.
I have a legal act to take on this. The state has indicated that they preempt us. If there is a federal law, would not that preempt the state's ability to give a permit for the sale? Would we not ask the FDA to contact the state and say?
We certainly can.
I would like to request that we do that. if the state's going to preempt us, then let's use a preemption against them from the feds.
Yeah, as I mentioned, when I raised that issue with the FWC's attorney, she was unaware of that federal statute.
I guess if the rest of the council agrees, I'd like you to contact the federal arm and let them know that this permit has been granted, which is, in our opinion, a violation of federal law.
I will look into it. I will mention that there is very vague language in the federal statute that talks about an exemption, that if you have an appropriate permit. So we will look into it and
Okay.
report back to you.
Thanks.
Anything else? Okay.
Rob is, I know we don't have public comment, but
Okay, Rob. 2 minutes.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I know it's kind of unorthodox. Yeah, Robert Howell, Robert, R-O-B, no, I'm just messing with it. And Mitch is the owner, and we actually did speak after the meeting yesterday about coming up with some plans and ideas to try to educate the people that are buying the turtles. Until we get the federal, what is legal or not with the federal law, I really am thanking you guys to look out and look into the FDA, because that's actually what I wanted to initially say is, if we can't enforce it at our level or your level, the fact that there's still a law being broken potentially, I feel like it's our duty to look into that and see why these permits are being granted. Because the same thing happened in Myrtle Beach, and they reached out to the FDA and they immediately came in and shut it down. Now I am perfectly willing to work with Mitch, the owner, and do educational videos, do educational papers. I've already started working on some. But that, for me, I think needs to be under the condition that, one, he's doing it legally, and if not, that we make sure that he is selling 4-inch or larger, just for the turtles' protection. And then also, I don't want to back something that I don't believe in, but I also don't want to just leave these uneducated if I have the opportunity to teach.
Let me ask you a question. Did the vendor in Myrtle Beach have a permit from any state agency to sell them?
They, from what I understand, from what I got together, is it was pretty much the same thing, where they had a permit to sell turtles. Then
In the state?
Yeah, and in the state permit, I can send, I think I've sent it to you in one of the original things when I started all this. But they ended up continuing to look into it, found out the turtles were smaller than known. I also did want to question that I don't think all these turtles are female. When they're that young, unless you're doing blood checks on each one, it's very hard to tell.
Do it? No. Okay, thank you, Robert.
Thank you, guys. I
that.
appreciate you taking time.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on. Item D, criteria for murals. Draft ordinance for the LPA to review and recommendations. Reason?
For you a draft of some language for the murals.
Must identify yourself.
I'm sorry,
sir.
Jason Green, Community Development. It was a draft of murals regulations, 24 for murals. Includes some review criteria, location criteria, and some definitions. This is based on the previous discussion at council meetings and P meetings, but also combining of those ordinances that I think the reference of reviewing from some other places. We do have some questions and need some clarification from you and direction related to, is it too restrictive in some areas, less restrictive in others? For example, zoning districts, difference between commercial and residential obviously is a critical component to that. Do you treat them the same? Screen them? Is there options to allow them in residential districts, but being screened from view? How much? The critical points. Secondly, percentage of wall. I think that was a criteria that we discussed previously, that originally I think 80% was. Based on the record, it talked about maybe utilizing the entire wall. What our intent was to try to limit that to it. So I don't know if it's now or different, how you would like to measure that. If it's less or more or a range, we're more than happy to work. If you want to go line by line or talk about the.
I wouldn't want to go line by line because I'm against sending 99% of this forward. I've done some research. What I'm finding is that this is an expanding area of litigation, and there's more and more litigation going on because of this. There is an recent ABA journal article that says this is the frontier of constitutional jurisprudence. I don't want the town of Fort Myers Beach being on the frontier of litigation regarding this issue.
Oh, come on.
The other towns may want to do that, but I don't want to be spending our legal fees on making case law. Let other towns make the case law first. The article further indicates we are witnessing an expansion of First Amendment applicability that may sweep up previously unchecked governmental controls on artwork and architecture. Local governments are therefore advised to carefully consider how their zoning codes and other regulations affect the ability of artists and architects to speak through their work. We found there was a recent filing against Mount Dora, where people put a mural on their home. Mount Dora didn't lose the case, but backed down because it looked like they were going to lose the case. So things are not looking good in this area of litigation. So we can go into further complexities, but I don't want to bore everybody with that. I'll just, at this point, say I would prefer not to send this on, at least 90% of it. If we need to clarify the difference between a mural and a sign or something of that nature, I don't have a problem with it, but I don't want to get into regulating. And again, I'm not against murals. I love them. I'd love to encourage them, but I don't want to be regulating them when it's going to maybe get us into a legal quagmire.
Just a quick question, Roxanne. Is most of this about free speech?
Yes.
So it's about, if you make an ordinance and then it's not about maybe saying about where you can put it, but what you can put on it?
It's very complicated. There are cases as to whether it's commercial speech or private speech. That's one of the reasons why I don't want to go into it, because it is extremely complicated to come up with a version that's going to be not attackable. The rules have not been written yet in the courts for us to follow, so that we know that what we're crafting isn't going to lead us into litigation.
You know, I agree with Madam Vice Mayor. I had, again, I'm by no means a lawyer, but I had probably 15 questions last night for our attorney that I just came up with. What if they did this, or what if they did that? Could we potentially be in a lawsuit? And the answer was pretty much always yes. Potentially you could. So I'm in agreement. I can't say any more than she's already said. I just fear that it could be opening a can of worms that I don't think we want to get into.
So as we stand now, without mural ordinance, there's nothing to prohibit people from putting a mural on the side of the building, as long as it's not considered to be a sign.
If it's obscene or if it's graffiti, there are certain things that you can take care of via zoning. But when you start getting into whether it's advertising, whether it's commercial speech, whether it's art, it's got to be content neutral. I'm sitting over there nodding. I'm throwing out all the words that he's.
My conversation with Councilmember Allers can be summarized pretty much in a statement that both of us repeated each other throughout the 40-minute conversation, which is one person's art is another person's objectionable. And so that's the problem. That when you start getting into this territory, start making the classifications, and some may say, well, they're arbitrary, and some say no. And inherent in this is making classifications and saying this is permissible and this isn't. And whenever you start saying this is what we're going to allow and this isn't what we're going to allow, it has the potential to generate litigation because someone doesn't like being told what they can or they can't do. And it's further complicated by the First Amendment aspects that the vice mayor is mentioning, and there are jurisdictions that do have these types of mural regulations. The document that you have before you is the result of that process, where we provided the council various examples of regulations by other jurisdictions throughout the country, including here in Florida. And the consensus at that time was that we use as a template, which is what's in before you, one that's already been adopted in a jurisdiction here in Florida. That's relatively simple, straightforward, and so that's the direction that we were given. That's what you have before you. But there's always certainly the potential for litigation, particularly in this area of the law, whereas the vice mayor again correctly points out it's just being established.
Oh, and going back to some of the points that Roxanne was making, like obscenity is defined, isn't it, by some other laws, or is like a
Yes,
legal definition of obscenity?
And so we would have that existing body of case law to use to say, hey, that's not permissible, that's offensive, et cetera. But again, there is some matter of discretion and disagreement as to what by people as to what is and isn't obscene. That's all I'm trying to point out.
Right, and what I'm trying to think about is if we don't have a mural ordinance, then what protections do we have against someone putting hate speech or obscenity? I know there are different classifications. I think graffiti is, to me, it's really depends on who's putting it on. Because if you're painting graffiti on someone else's wall, that's different than if you're doing it on your own wall. Then you get that one man's art is another man's graffiti.
And that is the inherent problem of your toe into this area and starting to regulate it. You start somewhere because you want to have exception or at least some level of regulation. So someone doesn't come in, put something up, and then take the position, well, you don't have any regulations that prohibits this. That is generally how government works, and sometimes, it's a very broad generalization, but sometimes government is reactive to situations that someone hasn't thought about. There isn't necessarily a regulation in place, and someone does something, or a property owner or business owner does something, and the government says, can allow that, or that needs to be regulated.
There's not this problem with our sign ordinance.
That's a separate but related issue. We have endeavored, like a lot of governments, to have mural regulations separate, standalone from sign regulations, because we're not necessarily, we're saying by definition here what is an acceptable mural. Otherwise, if it's advertising, then that would be a sign.
One of the things I was reading was that signs went through this wave in the last decade, and that area of the law is more settled.
Okay.
And murals are now the next wave that's coming through the court system right now. So our sign stuff seems to be safe because that's already been litigated. We've looked at what's been found acceptable in the courts. I believe our sign statute is safe, relatively speaking.
Relatively speaking. And
I don't want to say.
As a side note,
Yes.
that regulation, or that area of our land development code is going to be one of the areas where our consultant has been tasked to look at it and see if it needs to be improved. We'll be going through that as we go through the entire LDC with that consultant. We'll be taking a look at our sign regulations.
So now the question as far as the coverage of the sign ordinance, something like this, that if Joe's Burgers on the side of his building, now does that building now become a sign by definition?
Defer to Mr. Green, but generally, yes.
I know some time ago, there was another mural ordinance proposed, and I went in front of CRAB, and it was very restrictive. It required bonds be placed, and at a time we were trying to encourage murals to be put up, it seemed like it was nothing but a detriment to people putting up murals. To my mind with this, that if anything, if we can get away without a mural ordinance, or one that is just clearly setting what the difference between a mural and a sign is, and I can agree with Councilman Allers that I don't want to wade into sticky legal waters, and I don't want to restrict or any way discourage people from putting up murals and having the artistic ability to define what that mural is going to be.
One of the articles recommends that the better approach is to implement a mural program where you set forth design guidelines to enhance revitalization or beautification. So if we've got a group of people in town that are interested in this and they want to develop some guidelines that if people come to us and say, hey, is it legal for me to put this up, we could hand them this and say, this is what we would like to see, not make it an ordinance. That's what is recommended in at least one of the journal articles that I've read.
Another kind of advantage of the approach is that if you had an organization, they could also hold fundraisers, things to incentivize people to follow the guidelines instead of force them.
Again, I want to emphasize that based upon the direction given to staff by the council, which resulted in this draft, again, we tried to take that approach as being minimalistic as possible, compared to some of the other regulations, being fairly, example, the definition. There is a definition on the last page that will go into, when we put it in ordinance format, it'll be included in section 34-2, which is the definition sections, and it's pretty in its definition.
I know I've asked you this, but I'll ask it so that it's on the record. The sign ordinance that's already in place, I know that the discussion's been you want to separate murals from signs, but to me it appears that the sign ordinance covers a lot of what the worry is as far as logos and those burgers or whatever. Why couldn't we? Yeah.
But the sign ordinance comes down to size, right? You're limiting things to 32 square feet or 12 square feet. And my understanding is the murals are obviously much bigger than that, and that was probably what the intent. Usually you're talking about the side of it. Right now, your sign ordinance is very limiting in building or sign or just 5 different types of signs. So
I guess my question is,
That's a challenge, I think.
it's not possible to put within the sign ordinance a definition of what a mural is and what is potentially acceptable or not acceptable, as opposed to creating an entirely new ordinance revolving around just murals?
Well, this is going into the code, whether or not if your direction is for us to put it within the sign code, it's still not going to change what it says. If you want us to put it in the sign section of the LDC, we'll do so. What we found was that a number of jurisdictions, as well as some of the articles are out there, suggest that you have standalone mural regulations, so there isn't that crossover and mixing. A sign is a sign, a mural is a mural. I know that sounds very simplistic, but it's purposely so. If you want to put up a mural, you go to the mural regulations. If you want to put up a sign, you go to the sign regulations.
Perfect sense to me.
I'm sorry?
Makes perfect sense to me.
But again, we'll put it wherever you want, wherever you direct us to. That's the purpose of this conversation.
It would seem to me, since we're going to be undergoing this review anyway, there is no urgency about this at this point, I see. So I would rather defer, if we need to define mural, to that wholesale review we're doing of the code.
I personally have already looked in mind, and then we're going to consultants and talk about comes back to in the law. Right? I mean, even political signs, you can't really call them political signs anymore. You're talking about the content that's on the sign. So a lot of jurisdictions are having trouble with that. How do you regulate when those signs can? So it's,
And one point on what you said, Rexanne, is that this has been going on for now a couple of years. And my understanding is since we're in the process, that if there was a mural ordinance and it came to pass, that people they're frozen because they have to wait to see what that ordinance is going to be before they can see what they want to do. So if we put this off too long, we're basically saying no murals.
Oh, what I'm saying is, we stop the freeze process at this point. We look at this down the road again in a fresh way. Right now, if we stop that freeze process, people can put up a mural tomorrow.
That is correct. It's called zoning in progress, or the red flag doctrine. It's a land use environmental regulation that's recognized by the courts here in Florida, that says that, once the local government announces that they're looking to regulate a particular area or adopt a particular regulation, then people are on notice that's forthcoming. As a result, any application that is submitted is subject to the new regulations. They're basically kind of put on hold. However, I'll say that the inherent limitation is the courts say that you can't on the regulation for an inordinate period of time. At that point in time, you're not implementing the purpose of the zoning in progress, and generally the courts have said 6 to 12 months is the time frame by which you have to process that proposed regulation. I think we're maybe closer to 4 months when the council had this discussion and gave us direction to adopt this, maybe 6 months.
I think, though, the previous zoning mural ordinance that was proposed was a couple of years ago.
No, I'm talking about this particular one. Is about 6 months.
Because even then, I wasn't told there was any unfreezing of that ordinance.
I'm not aware of that. Did not involve me. I can only speak to the one that you have before you, and that was about 6 months ago.
So what's the process? Is that staff takes another look at it and then sends it to LPA to hash it out for a while and then bring it back to us again? Is that?
No.
Well, that's what's being debated, whether, but, our concern was that because of community sensitivity to this issue, normally, if it was a normal item that, just go to LPA, they would hash it out, and they would give you their recommendation. But because of community sensitivity on this issue, I wanted to have a discussion with you all first before the LPA got tasked to do anything. It's on your agenda today.
I'm saying, do not send it to the LPA. Let's not have zoning in progress going on regarding this issue. Right now, we're throwing the issue into the general pot to be considered with everything else when we look at the wholesale expert redo of the LDC.
So to bifurcate it is whether you want to continue the zoning in progress or bring it to a halt today or Monday theoretically. Two is to continue to look at this issue or not put it on the back burner to be reviewed as part of the overall LDC review.
Or a combo of the latter, that the manager, and we still have zoning in progress, because I was just talking to Mr. Green. We can put this at the top of the list of items that we're going to task the contractor with doing, so we have that protection of zoning in progress, bring it back to this body and ultimately the LPA, and then back to you all within the 12 months are up. And just assign this particular issue as a priority for the consultant to look at and give us their input, so we can bring back It may be, hey, the consultant says fraught with legal issues.
The only reason I'm saying to throw it to them is to decide if we need to have a definition which defines mural versus sign. Do we need to clarify it as to our sign ordinance? As to regulating murals, I don't want to do it. I don't want to have zoning in progress. That would be my vote on Monday. Do not send this to the LPA.
Your combination, call that the blended method. All right. What's the consensus of the rest of the council? We know where Roxanne stands.
I'm in agreement with Madam Vice Mayor.
I just think that the sign ordinance pretty much covers what we're trying to prevent anyway.
I just have a question if I could. We were contacted by, I think, somebody, a group that we all respect, this Island Public Art Group. It's newly constituted, and we're advocating for more public art, which I think is an admirable goal. I think we have, as a council, have an opportunity with the Bayfront and with Times Square renovation and with Bay Oaks. We have an opportunity to make sure that public arts, it would probably be appropriate for all three of those locations for us to make sure that that's a piece of that puzzle, and this is a group that can help with that. But in their missive to us, which was very thoughtful, they sent us pictures of maybe 25 murals on the island. My question is, so they seem to infer that they want more murals, and then, but yet this ordinance is very restrictive on the murals. The 25 that, I don't know if you've seen the pictures, Jason, but you've certainly seen a lot of the murals on the island. Those, is it the Wild Wild West out there with those murals, or how are those, are those just not even regulated? What's happening now? What's the problem we're trying to solve, I guess, is my question.
I guess that's a question for you. I've had zero conversations with, case by case, day by day basis on murals. We don't get that question. You get that question. We don't get that question.
The ones that exist now, did they have to be in any capacity approved, or?
I have had no conversation over. We don't.
I think the answer to your question, Counselor, is people have just taken it upon themselves to do that.
By taking off the zoning in progress, people can go out and do a mural next week if they'd like to do that. The group is telling us they want to encourage more art in the island. We're actually pulling them back by having this zoning in progress.
It's my confusion. So your point's well taken. We all want more murals. This restrains that. I'm not sure. I'm trying to find the problem we're trying to solve.
From experience, I think usually the problem trying to solve is the fear of what that mural. Speech, it's the content, it's size of it.
Whatever we have
message.
whatever we have in place now seems to be successful in constraining the obscene or the commercial, right? I mean, the pictures that they sent, there's nobody's even complaining about a particular mural. It seems like again a solution in search of a problem.
It's been self-regulated.
And I think you get a better picture of that when you find ordinances and the consider those components. Sure of how that all works together.
I think that one thing you mentioned, Jim, that's another conversation. How do we encourage public art? And I think this group can be an important part of that. But the other thing is, you know, when we looked at this with Crab some time ago, there were two aspects. One is how to encourage mural paintings on private buildings, and the other is coming up with a way to put them on public buildings. And things like Bay Oaks and Town Hall, wherever else we may want to do it, which is something we can do, but that requires us maybe earmarking some funds for development or something to put towards public art, maybe not even the murals, but other kinds of public art.
That's right, and I agree with that. I'm comfortable with the position that council's coming to at this point.
Okay, good. We've got consensus then. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is the granddaddy of them all, the Nuisance Abatement Board, and I think we'll take a 5-minute break before we start that up. Right?
It's like a nuisance.
Okay, it's 11:13, everybody's back. We'll resume with item E, which is nuisance abatement board, and this is a discussion of implementation of the nuisance abatement board.
Mayor,
Sir?
I may digress for 1 second on a previous item, just for
Yeah, sure,
a brief
Jim.
question
Sure,
to
sure,
our
sure.
council. Our town attorney, and I think the mayor made this clear, but I was a little perplexed, and we talked a little bit at the break, and I think there are still some folks on the island, businesses and residents, that are confused. So the executive order issued by the governor, Mr. Town Attorney, date of that executive order was what?
Fridays ago.
Fridays
Hold
ago.
on, let me.
I got my
It was September 20.
That's 2 Fridays ago. So in that executive order, the governor said that municipalities cannot collect fines on any particular mask ordinance, et cetera, or any other violation on the COVID restrictions. But what I think the mayor's aware of this, but what I learned at the break, talking to you, was that going forward, anything after September 25th, which would include the town's mask mandate, if any fines are imposed, they can be collected. Anything after it's just anything before the governor's order cannot be collected, but anything after the governor's order can be collected. Is that your understanding?
That's correct.
Okay, I just think that's really helpful for folks to understand, because it's been unclear, and the mayor understood that, but I didn't, until I talked to you afterwards, or at the break, I didn't fully appreciate that nuance, and I think, again, that'll be additional guidance to our residents. Thank you.
For example, I just randomly pulled up a news article that was written about that time. The headline of this news article is Florida Governor lifts all restaurant restrictions, which is correct. Bans mask fines as COVID-19 spreads. The second part of that headline is an incorrect statement. And in the article, it goes on to say that the mayor is banning fines. And order says that, very specific, it's any fines that have accrued as of the date of his order can't be collected until further notice. So theoretically, once that order lapses or gets modified, those accrued fines may or may not be allowed to be collected. Certainly moving forward, nothing in that order says that fines can't be assessed and collected post his order.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll get back to the nuisance abatement board. Who wants to start us out on this? John, do you want to? Roger, either one?
On the green sheet, we provided just beginnings of points for your deliberation in terms of how you would like to proceed with the nuisance abatement board. There clearly are more points to be reconciled, but at the very least, we would need to try to work our way through at least those 4 points in order to be able to begin to proceed.
Okay, so how are the cases identified? How are cases to be prosecuted, those 4?
Yeah. You know, certainly at some point, if the council to move forward is going to have to appoint the members of the nuisance abatement board, and certainly I would think that the first order of business would be to direct staff to place a notice and applicants for the positions for the nuisance abatement board in accordance with the process that we do for all our other boards, including the LPA, and then have those.
Sean, on that issue, it's a little bit unique here because if I remember the statute correctly, or the ordinance correctly, each individual council member can recommend one person. correct? Do those then still have to be publicly
Yes.
advertised? How will that differ than our normal process?
I thought it said appoint, not recommend.
Okay,
I
no
think-
point.
We
I
get
think
to
it says the town council shall appoint a seven-member nuisance abatement board. Each council member shall appoint one member, and two members shall be appointed at large collectively by the town council. One member who shall be an attorney in good standing with the Florida Bar. So the issue is you all want to individually canvass for your singular appointment. And advertise for the two at-larges, or advertise all the positions, and then from that, select your individual, and then collectively, from those that are left over, seek to appoint the two at-large. And that's the purpose of this conversation, is to get direction on how you all want to do this.
I've already contacted somebody and asked them if they were interested and received a yes. I figured, though, we were going to have an application somewhat like we have for the other committees, even for our appointees, so that we have their emails on record and that they are a resident of the town of Fort Myers Beach, that kind of thing, preserved in paperwork somewhere. So
Some kind of background check, which is done with the other committee members.
yeah, that kind of issue. But I figure we are going to have to advertise for the at-large members anyway. And I've also told people that have contacted me that I already had somebody, but if they were interested in serving, to contact one of you four.
I was just thinking out loud here, John, don't you think it would be better if we advertised, first get the qualifications and everything that's required of these people, and advertise for all of them? And then if you have a particular person in mind already, you know, that certainly could be your choice, but this opens it up to all people island-wide to at least make application, just like they would for any other committee that we have here on the island, and then narrow it down from there.
I agree, to get a pool of applicants. And if there's somebody who you want, and you talk to them and have them put in an application, then you appoint them, it's the same thing.
I'm comfortable with that. I like Rick saying, I've already had somebody who's reached out to me, and I've encouraged them to participate in this process, so I've indicated that I would be interested in having them serve. But having said that, I like a much more open approach. Everyone can apply, then we have a pool of applicants for the two at-large, for the two positions that we reach by consensus.
No, they don't even know what the requirements are yet. They don't know what the qualifications are yet. They may say, we're not interested, you know?
Yeah.
You never know.
That's
But,
fine. Yeah, I'm comfortable
you know,
with
I
that.
mean, that's just my,
John, don't we have some general qualifications for serving on committees in general, that you're supposed to be a resident of the town? So that we've already got that in place.
yes, we do, and we're just, you know, again, the purpose of the conversation is to confirm that we will use that process, which we will, and it seems that is where we're headed, and to the extent that any of you all have a particular individual that's not already identified, you ask that, you just instruct that person to make sure that they're named through the normal process that we do for all our other committees. We have.
With the exception of the chair, correct? Because
Well, then, the chair is obviously going to be, hopefully, someone will submit an application that is an attorney, and that maybe we get lucky. I really mean that, and we have more than one attorney apply, and so then you all would have the opportunity to, in accordance with the ordinance, designate which of those two or more attorneys want to designate as the chair. Let's shoot high. Right. Okay, that's how to select the board itself.
So just make sure I capture the council's consensus that we're going to advertise, and that we're going to use our additional criteria for application, and the way we would for our other committees.
We just need to add a box for NAB on our form.
Basically, yes.
It'd be helpful too to mention in that missive, Roger, that one of the applicants needs to be an attorney, so we are encouraging attorneys to apply.
We'll highlight that.
Kind of going in reverse order of the questions that are on the green sheet is, will the town attorney be the prosecutor or the nuisance abatement board attorney? I let your discretion. I'll fill either role. I will also state that it is legally permissible, or if you so direct, in my firm, to appoint another member of my firm to be the opposite. And what happens in that situation is that I have no contact or any interaction with that particular attorney on any matters relating to the new statement board. So there's what in legal parlance we call a Chinese wall established between myself and whoever may be the prosecutor or the nuisance abatement board attorney. That's the case. So there's no, but I cannot serve both functions. There's case law out there that says that's a prohibited conflict of interest. So alternatively, illicit among the community of an attorney to either be the prosecutor or the nuisance abatement board attorney at your discretion. The county sheriff's office, general counsel's office has made it clear to me and through, I think, the correspondence I provided to you all that they're not going to serve in either function.
Can you spend a second, John, and just describe in a proceeding what the role of the prosecutor would be versus the role of the NEB attorney?
The prosecutor would work with staff and the sheriff's office to put the materials together as it goes, how our case is identified and how they're prosecuted. So in answer to that, that individual would be would meet with and confer with the potential witnesses, make the determination as specified in the ordinance that there's enough information to warrant the scheduling of a hearing before the nuisance abatement board. And again, in traditional sense of the state attorney going to court, appear before the nuisance abatement board, assist with the presentation of testimony and the submission of evidence in support of the contention that the nuisance abatement board, the nuisance abatement ordinance has been violated and seek the appropriate relief as the case may be.
It seems to me, and I will yield to others on this, but it seems to me your role would be better served as the nuisance abatement board attorney, only in the sense that I think all of us envision a scenario where we hope we never get to a dynamic where we need a prosecutor. In other words, if you're the nuisance abatement board's attorney and there's an issue on the island, you and the board could reach out together to that particular property owner and begin conversations, hopefully in a way that negates any need for further prosecution. Is that fair?
No, not. It would actually be the prosecutor who would try and work out something with the property owner prior to a case ever going before the nuisance abatement board. As the attorney for the nuisance abatement board, I or another individual would be doing exactly what I'm doing here, which is advising the adjudicatory body, the nuisance abatement board, on issues of legality. What's the process? Mr. Attorney, can we accept this into evidence? Or the property owner's attorney or the property owner has objected. What do we do here? That is the function of the nuisance abatement attorney. It is theoretical that once the case gets to the nuisance abatement board level, the nuisance abatement board could instruct me or whoever that attorney is, can you work through some details? So let's put this case, let's hold this case in abeyance to see whether or not our attorney can work something out with the property owner or the property owner's attorney and bring back a settlement agreement or an agreed order
at the next hearing. That's, again, potentially would be the process of the nuisance abatement board attorney. But if it's prior in time to the hearing, any settlement or resolution would be the role of the prosecuting attorney and staff, and they would then bring that and present that to the nuisance abatement board, say that, hey, we've come to an agreement with the property owner, we're submitting this agreed order to you for your review and approval, and that would be the end of the process.
Very helpful, thank you.
We sort of envision you as the NAB attorney then.
I'm perfectly fine with that. Served in both roles, frankly.
Do you have a preference?
Do you want someone else from my firm to do that? Because then it would, be covered under our agreement, other than going out and seeking another outside attorney. Is perfectly fine as well.
Didn't answer the mayor's question. Do you have a preference? In other words, do you feel the town attorney's better suited for one of those particular roles?
You also work as a prosecutor when the magistrates.
Yeah, but I don't serve as the attorney for the magistrate, because the code enforcement statute has a similar prohibition. I can't be both.
Right.
What do you think's best?
Let me answer it by saying I have full confidence that if you ask, if I were to task either responsibility, someone else within my firm, that we would do it just equal. Probably from a familiarity standpoint, probably me being the nuisance abatement board attorney might be better, because people know who I am. Regard, and then we would put the prosecutor together with staff and make sure that they have the proper communications and relationship to then move forward with the presentation of the cases.
So if we make you the nuisance abatement board attorney, and then we have a separate prosecutor, we'll have to advertise for that, Roger, to put out a contract?
Well, that's one option would be to do that. So whatever role you didn't task John to do, we would advertise for the other role. Or is he suggesting another alternative would be to use a different attorney within his firm?
I would rather not use somebody within his firm. I think if we're trying to make things look separate, the appearance is important. The public does not understand Chinese wall. So since we're wanting to have the appearance that things are above board, in addition to the fact that they really are above board, I would prefer to advertise for a separate prosecutor.
And your firm could respond to the advertisement. It just doesn't look like we're throwing everything your way,
Again, the point I think the vice mayor is saying, we can do that, and if that's, we'll do that. But there's a level, I think, that the concern of the vice mayor is the optics. I understand that, and that's the genesis of the case law. But the case law is, and I can provide it to you all, is very clear that you can have members. And in fact,
I understand that.
It happens at the state level, where with state agencies, where the general counsel to the secretary of DEP sign the orders that the secretary signs, but if there's a hearing about it, it's handled by someone else within the general counsel's office that's completely related and has no interaction or contact with the other attorneys in the office. And you all.
One thing I did think is fairly important to me is to the kind of terms. I mean, advantage with John's attorney is we have like an hourly rate. I'd like to avoid getting into a contract where the prosecutor would want some kind of retainer just to be on standby, because there's not a lot of action with the.
Our basic engagement letter would govern. We would charge the same hourly rate that we currently do. We would just do it on an hourly basis. Open a separate billing number for purpose of keeping them separate. that way, so you track, as well as we can keep track of how much time and on the prosecution side, as well as the advising the.
And just for clarity, the prosecutor here is not the investigator, that
No,
it is brought to them.
the way that the nuisance abatement board is written is that the investigator is going to either be one on staff
Or the sheriff.
or someone from the sheriff's office, or a combination. That's how the cases get identified or initiated. I mean, and the ordinance is tracks almost verbatim the state statute, and even to my surprise, state statute says anyone can file a complaint with the nuisance abatement board. Obviously, that's the process by which the sheriff's office or our staff, in conjunction with the prosecutor, would vet that complaint, determine if it's someone other than themselves, vet that complaint, determine whether or not there's sufficient information to support the allegations, move forward with the case before the nuisance abatement board. I mean, the criteria is pretty straightforward and set forth in the ordinance. You, in a 6-month period of time, you have to have instances of certain types of violations that have to be documented.
Would it be accurate to say that the prosecutor is going to have more work than the court attorney? Because if you're talking about it.
My educated guess is yes, sir.
Okay, because they're going to be, before this goes in front of a board, they'd be working with the vetting between and liaison.
The
between
nuisance
sheriff.
abatement board attorney only comes into play when the nuisance abatement board meets, and to the extent that is, as Councilmember Adderholt indicated, if the nuisance abatement board then tasks the board attorney of following through with what took place at the hearing, saying, hey, work with the property owner to bring this to a conclusion and back to us, which is an alternative that exists on the front end as well.
Or when the nuisance abatement board is sued for their actions, you would be their attorney to defend them.
Yes. And it would be, under the, I mean, my experience has been, based upon the case law, the way it is, it's going to be the town defending that because the nuisance abatement board is an agency or an entity of the town. So the town is the one responsible for defending that action. Yes.
John,
Thank you.
it might be more interesting we're on the prosecutor side, because one of our concerns would be to make sure we don't spend a lot of time and resources on frivolous complaints. So you could, if you help vet those early on, because as you said, the criteria is pretty clear, we shouldn't have to hire someone to vet a frivolous complaint, right?
Well, I think that your staff is with most things that come before this body or any of your advisory committees or the special magistrate, they're vetted and cleared by your staff to begin with.
We could do that. We wouldn't have to bring that to the prosecutor.
And I would certainly suggest that and say that the staff should consult with the attorney, but that is, that vetting is going to be done up front as soon as the complaint comes in. It either meets the criteria in the statute or doesn't. And I think that's to the point that Councilmember Veach was mentioning before, is that almost by definition, by the way that this is set up, is the complaints are going to be developed and investigated by either the sheriff's office or staff, or the two in conjunction with each other. I don't see a whole lot of, and haven't been involved in a whole lot of third-party complaints. Maybe the initial complaints that, from a neighbor saying, hey, do you know that selling drugs out of the house 2 doors down from me? That's the initiation of the complaint or the investigation. But the complaint then gets formally submitted, gets vetted, and if the criteria is met and it warrants taking to the board, then that is the process.
Is there any scenario where the Public Safety Committee is involved with vetting any complaints before they go to the investigation portion of it?
I It's not provided for in the ordinance, but if that's an informal process that the council wants to try and implement to have a set of eyes, you do that, and we would incorporate that into the investigative process.
Personally, I'd not prefer to see that because you're getting too many committees involved. It's too complicated.
I think the only advantage to that would be if the Public Safety Committee could vet it initially, then you could serve as that eye, those eyes and ears to determine whether it was frivolous or not, right? Or no?
Yeah, no, there's whoever is tasked with being the prosecutor going to be the person who should be responsible for that because of what I identified as the potential wall, either whether it's me, the prosecutor, someone else from my firm, or anyone else from outside. It would be inappropriate under the rules of professional conduct for me to be intruding in their area of responsibility and vice versa.
You said it's your experience that there are very few frivolous complaints filed. It's generally filed by initiated by the sheriff or the town.
The answer to your question, whether it's me or another attorney who's the prosecutor, I think frivolous complaints are going to be disposed of fairly quickly and easily.
Okay.
Sheriff cannot be the initiator of the complaint. According to the statute, it comes from a person who resides in or is employed within the town. Unless the sheriff, an individual deputy lives within the town or works for the town, they cannot be the initiator of the complaint.
People could complain to the sheriff.
They need to complain to the town or to the sheriff. Yeah, but the sheriff himself is not the initiator.
Back to the kind of question at hand here, I do think that I see John's role as a prosecutor as being a little more appropriate because he already has knowledge, he already has institutional knowledge and relationships with the town members to know, and a lot of questions probably initially be directed to him by staff anyway. So it seems like having him as a nuisance abatement board attorney would be kind of having to leapfrog around that process. And kind of I know in this role, he's more like the nuisance abatement board attorney, but then when he's dealing with the magistrate, he's more of a prosecutor, and then he deals intimately with staff in doing that.
I would prefer to see John as the prosecutor than board attorney, for the reasons that up. Maybe more busy, but have a better knowledge of being involved with the discussions to get to where we're at now, to be able to decipher a complaint quicker than maybe someone else could. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, but I can assure you that if the decision is the other way, my first and primary responsibility to spend as much time as necessary with whoever that prosecutor may be to bring them up to speed on prior ordinance, background, the issue that gave rise to it, and I can think that either way, you're going to be able to find either through the firm or through an outside attorney, someone properly qualified to either responsibility.
Yes, I would prefer to have a different person be the prosecutor. Because one of the ideas of having the nuisance abatement board is it's not the town coming after you, it's not base coming after you, it's the people of the town have decided that we do not want to have this kind of behavior. People who serve on the nuisance abatement board, and their prosecutor is a separate person who is not our town attorney. Otherwise, you get the perception from the public that the town is after you. Businesses feel the town is out because he is the face of our town's legal persona.
That's a fair point, but I think that the objective, I think, of the majority, in fact, maybe all of the members of the council, I think, is that A, this nuisance abatement board not be heavy-handed, B, that it be used very rarely, if ever, and if the prosecutor's the front line of that and can negate any frivolous cases, and B, be the negotiator with that particular property that's having problems, it seems like we can hopefully resolve any issue that might arise before it even gets to a formal action against that property. And it seems like that prosecutor is positioned to address those issues first, or it gets to a more elevated level.
And the prosecutor will be acting under our aegis, as it were. They don't get to go out and be too aggressive because they're our employee and we control them.
Yeah, but I think they don't have the benefit of the history of seeing how this was all formulated and what the premise of the nuisance abatement board was here on the island. John has the luxury of all that history, and he knows the intent of the council, and is to A, not be heavy-handed, and to B, make sure this nuisance abatement board is rarely, if ever, used. I think if you hire somebody from outside, you're not going to have that institutional knowledge and likely wouldn't have that perspective. That's just a concern I would have.
Brought up to speed quickly on those points, but anyhow, this isn't something that we have to hammer out today, do we?
Again, this is, take action, we can get your consensus. I think, as I said at the beginning, that really the first step, entire process is last question. Board established. And everything that's established, all can then answer the, at that point in time, what would be the critical question. Serves what function?
Okay, well, we've kicked it around well today, and there is more time to think about it. Do you want the other two questions answered today too as well, or?
Well, there's no issue working on these things successively, wish to, or we'll work on them concurrently, if you wish to. Clearly, anything that's going to be where we're advertising for a position, there's time inherent in that process. So, want to crawl, you could do one step at a time. If you want to walk, we can do two things concurrently, whatever you want. On a run, we could do multiple things concurrently.
I think that we've touched on the first two questions, frankly. And as the second one in particular as to how this case is prosecuted, again, not to belabor the point, specific process is laid out in the ordinance itself.
I would like to maybe talk a bit about the first point, which is now, of course, the last point, is that, how are things identified? Because there's, for a lot of things, like there was recently a news story about someone who backed into 3 cars and drove down and got pulled over by Mango Street and had drugs in the car. They parked in one establishment, ran into the other, and came back out and did this kind of damage. Now, there's obviously some public information that can be gleaned about whether or not that was a drug-related incident or not, or whether that qualifies. And I think it's probably really, it falls on us, meaning staff, to try to keep track of. There's another case at that establishment that was drugs within 6 months.
No. Complaint comes from the public, not our staff.
No, but they complain to somebody, and it can either be the staff or the sheriff.
Right, and once we receive the complaint, then we check the record and see if there in fact been 2 cases filed that involve drugs. Our staff is not going to be the people who are making this stuff happen. They make it happen once we've received the complaint. But they are not initiators.
It is
Again, that looks like the town is after people, and that's what we're trying not to have that perception.
It says any person who resides in or is employed within the town may file a complaint. Very broad. And like, again, to use the code enforcement analogy, generally, 99, not, certainly the 90 percentile and above, cases that are brought to the special magistrate originate from complaints outside of the town. Third-party complaints. Someone complains to staff, staff investigates, and determines a code violation.
The person who makes the complaint must be a resident of the town or an employee of the town. For example, Charlie Whitehead, who lives on San Carlos Island, could not file a complaint.
Theoretically, which that limitation doesn't exist, by the way, for code complaints. Anyone, period.
So then, by what you're saying, that someone would have to make a complaint that there has been 2 instances within 6 months. Now make a complaint of 1 instance, and 3 months later make a complaint of another instance.
We can't control what it is they report, but if they're hoping to be successful, they should have their ducks in a row.
Or the initial complaint comes in that there is generically, again, to use drug house as an example, one selling drugs outside from the house three houses down from me on my street. Staff takes that complaint in. Sheriff's office works with staff to identify and confirm that there are multiple sales within a 6-month period of time. The criteria has now been met. These cases are going to take time to document and to get up, for better description, go forward and actually file a case and notify the property owner we're taking you to the. This isn't going to be that, you know, we get a complaint and just gets verified. Oh yeah, you're correct. It's got to meet the criteria in code, which is in state statute, that there's documented evidence that this activity has taken place on at least 2 incidents within a 6-month period of time. And in many instances, that is going to be the result of an investigation by staff in the sheriff's office that arises from the initial complaint.
So somebody complains about they're selling drugs at Joe's Burgers. And I hope no one opens up a place on Fort Myers Beach called Joe Burgers in some. Let's say someone has a complaint with Joe's Burgers, right? So this goes and it's validated somehow. So the prosecutor would then, when the complaint comes in, would Joe's Burgers be notified of the complaint? Would they be notified when it's vetted?
When it's vetted, when it's ready to go before the nuisance abatement board.
Even if it's like the first complaint?
No rule, it's going to be investigated. You want to keep that information confidential, so if there is illegal activity taking place, doesn't, you know, the person committing the crime, oh, they're onto me, so now I'm going to go and change locations.
See, I'm actually, yeah.
Unless you want.
The point
Unless you
I'm
want,
making,
if
and
that's-
I think we kind of agree, some of us agree on this, is that the point is not to get as many cases in front of the nuisance abatement board as you can. The point is to try to change behavior. If there's someone who's got a business, you know, Joe's Burger again, and he gets his first complaint and he realizes that he's got a manager who is doing something, or, you know, then that's his chance to take some action, so it never goes in front of the nuisance abatement board.
Or they get that second occurrence.
Because they know that first it's like calling that first strike. They know now they can take action unilaterally, or consult with the sheriff, or find out what's going on in their property and take action before it gets to that second complaint.
My guess.
I would just say this, that we have to allow for time for the police department and the sheriff to do their job. So, if, you know, we get a complaint that there's drugs being sold at Joe's Burgers, we're going to call the sheriff's office and say, hey, we have a complaint that there are drugs being sold at Joe's Burgers.
You may very well go down and arrest them.
And they may go talk to the owner of Joe's Burgers, they may set up an undercover operation, you may have an officer just drive by there on occasion. I don't know what their protocol is going to be.
May tell you that it's already under investigation, you know.
They may say it's under investigation, or we'll let you know when we're done. It could be one of 20 different answers.
Another scenario that I see, though, which is a lot faster, is that someone calls in and says, hey, there's been more than 2 convictions for drugs being sold at this location. Prosecutor goes and pulls the paper record, which you can do in 5 minutes, and finds that there's 2 convictions. Your case is already there. So it could happen very quickly if there's already been convictions.
I think another scenario will occur when Wing TV or the news press reports some sort of major criminal activity on the island. Alarm bells will go off. If that same location has another incident within that 6-month period, people will naturally then respond accordingly. I guess procedurally, this question, and Roxanne brought this up incorrectly, is it a conviction or is it a police report? Is that a threshold we have to determine?
It is that there's
like it was a
been
little
documentation that in more than 2 occasions within a 6-month period, 1 through 9 has occurred.
Use the
Not a
word
conviction that has occurred.
use the word documentation. What does that mean?
A public, quoting from the ordinance, which is almost verbatim from the statute, generally, but not limited to, a public nuisance shall mean any place or premises which has been the site of on more than 2 occasions with a 6-month period of 1 through 9 having taken place. So if there's documentation that's taken place, that qualifies for that location being deemed to be a public nuisance.
Use the term,
Not necessarily a conviction.
the term
Now-
documentation. You mean like a police report, or what do you mean by document?
Correct.
Okay, all
Completely,
right.
yeah, yes.
Okay.
So just to perhaps think it through. So a police officer witnesses a drug sale at those burgers, but the person who did the sale got away and they don't know who that is, but they saw the sale. That documentation would be one of the 2 instances that would be theoretically applied to this ordinance, not the fact that they actually caught that person and arrested that person, because the person may have gotten away. That they documented that they saw the drug sale at that location, or the police report, and that would be qualifying event for one of the, now, still, that case has to be made in front of the nuisance abatement board when it happens for the 2nd time. They would have to then agree that there was a violation of the code.
And technically, it wouldn't have to be a police officer. If a citizen believes that they have observed drug sales and they make the complaint, they could come in and testify.
Well, I would say with sworn statement.
They could come in and testify before the nuisance abatement board.
They could, but I think to sort of trigger all that action, we would want to do.
Oh, I'm not saying you wouldn't want a sworn statement, but that was one of my concerns with this is you've got citizens who are coming in and testifying to having seen criminal activity, but no actual conviction ever took place. They didn't have to go through beyond a reasonable doubt.
It sounds like we can set that threshold, and it sounds like John when he defined documentation, he said police report.
But this doesn't say that. Your statute doesn't say that it has to be documented.
Our nuisance abatement board, we appoint, and we direct, well,
Well, we don't get to direct them. They're the judges.
we pick them and we,
We pick them, but we don't get to direct them.
well, the public picks us, but they don't direct. Is that what you're saying? I mean, so, I mean, that's obvious. I mean, so we want to pick people with common sense, don't have an axe to grind, who aren't looking to litigate for frivolous purposes. I mean, that's on us to appoint people with common sense and with a practical approach to this, as we've talked about before.
You know, I see a lot of this falling on the prosecutor. I mean, I'm just thinking about, of course, my legal expertise comes to watching TV shows. You know, when the prosecutors take cases that they think they have enough to
That's right.
convict on, that if it's really weak, then they will tend not to take it. And if it's, you know, if Tony's Tacos is complaining about Joe's Burgers next door without any evidence, then the prosecutor would, you know, determine whether or not that's worth pursuing or not.
John has mentioned that the initial vetting of these will be fairly quick. I mean, quick is a broad term, but someone just calling in and saying those burgers is dealing drugs, can't really go any further than that if there's no police activity involved.
Absolutely. To use Vice Mayor's example, if there's conviction, if it's that there's been an arrest, then the prosecutor and staff are going to have to pick up the phone or email or otherwise communicate with the sheriff's office and verify, hey, have there been the requisite 2 instances or record of in 6 months that there have been violation of the following 9 categories.
But our
That's the
statute,
vetting.
but our statute doesn't require that there has been police activity.
Well,
It could be solely on, like we said, a sworn statement from a neighbor who lives next door to this establishment, who has witnessed drug sales.
yes.
Based on our statute.
Yes, based on the statute, the issue of proof and starts coming into play.
Right, and then that's when the nuisance abatement board decides whether that's enough proof or not.
Yes, to take that for example, I could see if you're relying exclusively on the testimony of a neighbor, which is permissible, the prosecutor's going to run into problems when let's assume the property owner has an attorney and asks the witness, the neighbor, how do you know that it was drugs? Did you do a field test? Verify that the alleged substance is in fact an illegal substance. Generally speaking, the only people who are qualified to administer those tests and do those tests is a law enforcement officer. So almost by definition, and with some of these types of violations, there's going to be a requisite need to involve the sheriff's office unless there's already a prosecution, conviction, and the case proves itself.
We're probably getting ahead of ourselves, but based upon what Councilor Hosfrost talked about, if it is 2 convictions, is it the conviction date that's within 6 months, or is it the date of the occurrence of the criminal activity?
The date of the criminal activity.
Okay.
The case could take some time to get through the court system.
Okay. What we've decided today is that we're going to advertise for the positions.
Be continued.
Yes. Okay, good enough. Next item is agenda management for the October agenda management. Manager, do you have anything to?
No, not on this in particular, obviously. We'll see what information we can glean for on the fireworks situation. The other thing that I had on my list to talk about, not necessarily exactly agenda management, was when the council discussed reducing the fees for 6 months for the restaurants in Times Square using our right-of-way. You didn't specifically mention another establishment that has an agreement that's not in Times Square, but it's in the vicinity, SOBs.
We did. I think Councilor Hosfrost brought that up, and I think we
So
all agree.
we're on the assumption that we're going to apply the same discount to them.
That's what the council.
Okay, I just wanted to be
decided.
sure
Yeah.
that we got that correct. No, sorry, I had nothing specific on agenda management unless the council did.
Anybody else have anything?
I haven't been bringing up a lot because of COVID going on, but I have had some people ask me if we were going to do another hazardous waste pickup. I know we didn't have a lot of participation last fall, but I think it's one of those things that folks learn about, that it happens at the same time every year. I know I've seen my neighbors putting paint, et cetera, in their trash cans. And I'd like to see as little of that as possible. So, and I know we did it last fall, and I think maybe it was even a little early. when we did it in
Yeah,
October?
we've arranged multiple dates for
Okay.
that with Lee County. We'll get that information out to you shortly. I believe
Great,
it's
super.
in the forthcoming Public Works monthly report.
And if we could start pushing that out through Jennifer so that people start planning for it, because I know I put a box and told all my neighbors, hey, you got stuff, put it in this box that's in my yard, I'll be taking it over.
Yes, we'll start, now that we have the dates, we'll start putting that out.
Great, super. You anticipated my needs, Roger. It's lo-
Well, actually, what happened was when we talked to the county about updating the solid waste management agreement we had with Lee County, we put in there that they would do this X number of times per year. I believe it was 4 times per year, and then it was just a matter of getting the dates that we could get it scheduled.
4 times a year, yay, Chelsea.
4 times a year?
Okay.
Times a year.
Anybody else wish to?
I've got one small thing. There's a part of the town right away in front of the whale, which is by Palermo there. And it's just now rock. It's kind of an eyesore. I just like the council's discretion to work with some, like the Native Plant Society and MRF and some others, some master gardeners, to come up with a plan to vegetate that in a way which does not interfere with traffic and views. And it could be a demonstration project for native plants.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good. Anything else going once?
One quick thing, with some discussions with the Lee County Sheriff's Office, people down here and the Public Safety Committee, we're looking for some direction from council as far as how far we want them to dive into working with Lee County Sheriff's Office as far as monitoring police and fire calls, things like that. If that's something that we want to direct them to keep an eye on, or you know, to advise council if they see any trends or non-trends. They got a meeting coming up on Tuesday, and I'm quite certain that I'm going to be asked what direction the council wants as far as getting in depth with working with the Lee County Sheriff's Office.
I would think that if the sheriff was wanting input from us, they would go through Roger. Never like designated you to be a liaison to the sheriff, and I'm not against that.
No.
Is that something we want to do rather than?
Well, what I did do is ask the fire district and the sheriff's office for to continue providing us with monthly statistics. So, you know, we've asked them to do that. I remind them that we'd like to see them at the end of whenever they close a month to get that, send that to us, so we're aware of what's going on. We could share that with whoever you'd like us to share that with. We could share it with the council. We could share it with the Public Safety Committee and the council. We could have it here for staff analysis, whichever you'd like.
Yes, I'm confused now because it sounds like you already asked for what they were telling Dan they needed to know.
It's not that they needed to know anything. It was just discussions about, you know, the Public Safety Committee is there for a reason. And involving the sheriffs with the Public Safety Committee just seems like a natural thing to do, to have conversations between their PIO and our PIO and maybe the Public Safety Committee for the numbers that Roger was talking about. Give them a chance to look at it. Let them look into and spend the time to get stuff from Lee County Sheriff's Office to what they're seeing, what the trends are, you know, what crime is coming, what they're seeing it spikes in, not spikes in. Just being proactive to working through potentially could become a problem. Not necessarily advising anything, or let them do the legwork that they're willing to do, provide staff the information that they can bring to us, say we're seeing an uptick in this. I want to work with the sheriff's office on. That's kind of what I was getting at, not necessarily a dive into deep depth. There's a lot of numbers out there. Yeah, just, you know, as we've learned over the last couple of months, there's a lot of numbers that are out there, and there's a lot of things that don't necessarily correlate to the numbers that you see or the problems that you see. I just think it would be a proactive thing for the Public Safety Committee to look at, to be able to help us, to be able to help see if there are any trends or if there isn't any trends. Are we really seeing an uptick in graffiti?
I'm sorry I'm being dense, Dan. I thought you first asked that the sheriff's office was asking for guidance for us about something, and then you just said we have the Public Safety Committee interface
Well,
with them.
if
So I'm
I-
not sure what your request is.
My request was, is it okay that the Public Safety Committee work with Fire Department and the Lee County Sheriff's Office to gather the numbers that they're going to provide to staff? Or if you want to word it, is it okay for staff to provide the numbers that get reported to them, to provide them to the Public Safety Committee?
That's the way to go, I think.
To let them review the numbers. So the staff gets
Yeah.
the numbers, they provide it to the Public Safety Committee, let them vet out things or trends that they may be seeing based on those numbers, and then advise staff to advise us or let.
Since Roger has asked for the numbers, it would seem appropriate that staff then provides them to the Public Safety Committee.
And I'm totally okay with that. Maybe I misspoke at the beginning. The Lee County Sheriff's Office hasn't really asked for anything. They're willing to
Okay.
help whatever the council or whatever the community wants them to do. So I was just trying to look to get some direction to advise them on Tuesday at the meeting, if I'm asked, what do you want to task us with? What is something that we can help?
Your meeting is with the Public Safety Committee, not with the Sheriff's Office.
Correct. But going forward, is it going to be okay to the Public Safety Committee to work with the people that are working down at the Outreach Center?
Sure.
It's kind of, maybe, again, I didn't word it properly, but
No,
that's
no.
essentially what I'm getting at.
I was not understanding,
Okay.
so I was asking for
So
clarification.
that seems natural too, because I think we've also tasked the Public Safety Committee with studying community policing, proposal from the Sheriff's Office, as well as neighborhood watch groups, et cetera. So those are still on the agenda as well, correct?
Correct, and that's, I'm quite certain I'm going to be asked that. Is that something you want us to look into, the neighborhood watch stuff, work with the Lee County Sheriff's PIO people to information, what's best practices, what to do, things like that, get information that can be pushed out to people to what to look for. You know, they always say, see something, say something, things like that. Get information in the hands of the people that can get it out to everybody is kind of what everybody's looking to do.
You better do your homework then this week and have all those things at your fingertips there.
But
Anybody else?
having brought up the issue, it seems like you are in contact with the Sheriff's Office a lot. Is that something we want to do, to have Dan be our unofficial liaison to them? So that he's not coming to us?
Sure. I mean,
It says in our policy manual, we're allowed to appoint point people for particular things. And do we want to make that official?
Well, I'm going to say that I think it's important that the fact that all of you have relationships in the community is great with certain people, and we love that because that helps us with a lot of issues. I do think it's important that the staff work with the staff.
Okay.
The elected officials work with the elected officials. So, if there's something that staff needs to do to interface with the sheriff's office, I think it's better for John and myself to be doing that. In terms of, the sheriff's initiatives and working with the sheriff to promote his initiatives of a safer community, that's great. That's something for any and all of you to do if you wish to.
Could you share those monthly reports from the fire department, the sheriff's office on runs with the council? That'd be great. I'd
Be happy to share with you.
when you get them.
Well, now you want to get into the act.
I got one more
Yes,
point.
sir.
One more point, Mayor. We talked about when we got done with the appointments for the committees this October, that we could have a joint meeting between the chairs of the committee and town council. And I don't really see that on the agenda anywhere. Something I'd still like
Yeah,
to do.
so the committees are just starting to meet based on your appointments. They're picking their chairs. As soon as all the chairs, like the Public Safety Committee hasn't met yet. Excuse me. So once all the chairs are picked, then we could try to coordinate that meeting, because now we know the 6 or 7 people who we have to coordinate schedules with. I don't know who they are yet. But I assume you'd rather have that sooner than later.
Okay. Anything else? Not hearing anything else, we'll adjourn at 12:12. Thank you.
Here.